Chapter 9:17. Feng Zhen, who was far away in Chongzhou, did not know that his darling had been harmed by Jiang Pingji. After settling the matters in Wanzhou, Jiang Pingji prepared to return to Chongzhou to preside over the overall situation. Wanzhou recruited many middle-level talents. These people had clean backgrounds and were not of high birth. They were hard-working and easy to manipulate. Jiang Pingji met them one by one. She praised Su Ku and Feng Jin again and gave them a bonus. As for Feng Jin's indirect questions about the break, she pretended to be deaf and dumb. The situation in Wanzhou was stable, but there was trouble in Chongzhou. The gentry clans in Chongzhou had learned their lesson after being bullied by her. But not long after she left, they returned to their old ways and wanted to cause trouble for her. Haha, a bunch of idiots. Jiang Pingji laughed coldly. Do these people think the coffins are not placed long enough and the corpses are not rotten enough? Her words were vicious. If the gentry clans in Chongzhou heard them, they would definitely vomit blood in anger. Last winter, Jiang Pingji entered Chongzhou and killed several senior gentry clans in Chongzhou. She even used the military to suppress and intimidate them. She gathered one group of people to suppress another. Her clean and efficient methods scared the gentry clans so much that they did not dare to let out a fart. She even sent troops to surround their mansions, forcing them to be unable to bury their relatives' corpses in their ancestral graves. They could only stay in the mourning hall. This stop lasted until summer. The corpses had already decomposed into white bones. The stench of corpses filled the air. The gentry clans finally could not resist anymore. They gave in to Jiang Pingji and unwillingly spat out a portion of the land deeds. However, Jiang Pingji was a ruthless person. She refused to withdraw her troops even after receiving the land deeds. They had to spit out all the land they had seized from the people. After a stalemate, the gentry clans in Chongzhou could only bear with the pain and swallow their resentment. They swallowed their resentment, but the death grudge was also settled. When they buried the corpses of their relatives in their ancestral graves, Jiang Pingji ran off to Wanzhou. They had nowhere to vent their anger. However, they could not kill Jiang Pingji, but it did not mean that they could not get back at them. What were the gentry clans? They were a group that placed their personal and family interests above the interests of the country. As long as their families did not fall, the carnage outside had nothing to do with them. In order to take revenge on Jiang Pingji, a few families formed an alliance in private and planned to join forces with the north borderline to betray their teammates. Of course, this matter was exposed to Jiang Pingji, which showed how bad their confidentiality measures were. In fact, the ancients did not seem to have any sense of secrecy. In the history of the previous dynasty, how many coups were stifled because of leaks? Su Ku also saw the secret report and couldn't help but be speechless. These people are really, even if the Lord was too ruthless, wasn't the cause because they forcibly occupied the fertile land, oppressed the good people and trampled on the common people? They had done such a heinous thing, and now that their Lord had forced them to spit it out, did they still feel that they had been wronged? Not only did they suffer grievances, they even allied with the forces of the northern borderline and prepared to open an opening at the border to let the cavalry of the northern borderline break in? Fortunately, the northern border has yet to recover from the horse plague 2 years ago. Even if we send the cavalry to kill and pillage, there won't be many of them. Su Ku furrowed his brows and said, otherwise wouldn't we be inviting a wolf into the house? Those people actually dared to do such a thing. Jiang Pingji laughed coldly. She crushed the secret letter, her eyes filled with a cold, murderous intent. I originally wanted to keep them for a while, but I didn't expect them to be tired of living and take the initiative to hand over their weaknesses. Not to mention anything else, just the fact that they had colluded with the enemy and committed treason was enough to consign them to eternal damnation. Previously, Jiang Pingji falsely accused them of colluding with the enemy and committing treason, but she didn't have concrete evidence in her hands. She could only rely on her mouth to distort the purpose of their annexation of land. Now that she had concrete evidence in her hands, she didn't believe that she couldn't kill these vermin. Does my lord want to catch them all in one fell swoop? Jiang Pingji said, they are playthings that cause endless harm. It's better to squash them to death as soon as possible. According to the original plan, she wanted to deal with them before the war with the northern borderline. She didn't expect them to be even more anxious than she was, taking advantage of the time when she was not in Chongzhou to plot to take away her assets. These people were still too impatient. Jiang Pingji left Chongzhou, how could she not send people to keep an eye on them? At such a time they should be even more cautious, tuck their tails between their legs and not let the cat out of the bag. However, they couldn't swallow their anger and had to stir up trouble. However, they couldn't be blamed for being stupid. Jiang Pingji was really too ruthless. If they didn't take advantage of the time when Jiang Pingji was not in Chongzhou, according to the trend of her development in Chongzhou, the longer they delayed, the more powerful she would be. Their hopes of revenge would become smaller and smaller. It was a pity that they underestimated Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang's abilities. How could the combat power of the two of them be as simple as 1+1? It was estimated that before Jiang Pingji reached Chongzhou, these jumping clowns would have already been caught by their inescapable net. Reality proved that Jiang Pingji's guess was not wrong. "My lord, you look radiant." Wen Zheng and I, on the other hand, have been restless for more than a month. Feng Zhen had a pair of dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he had been sucked dry by a demoness. "Why are you all acting like this?" Jiang Pingji rushed to Chongzhou without stopping. Along the way, she didn't have time to take a detour to see Wei Ci. When she reached Chongzhou, she saw that her two right-hand men looked like they hadn't slept for a long time. Wen Zheng's left arm was even tied with a white cloth. Those people are planning to fight to the death. Previously, they sent men to assassinate Wen Zheng. When the assassination failed, they instigated others to cause trouble. Fortunately, Han Mei and Wen Zheng were discussing the matter of farming and recruiting soldiers. That was how I managed to survive. When Qiguan Rang was assassinated, Jiang Pingji was still on the road, so she didn't receive the news. What? Haven't these people been arrested? Jiang Pingji glanced at Qiguan Rang. When his eyes met hers, he winked. His gaze carried a hint of meaning. She was so angry that her whole body was trembling. She thought more than Feng Zhen. Why did Qiguan Rang have to be the one who was assassinated? One had to know that Qiguan Rang's position was impartial. In comparison, Feng Zhen's hatred was greater. She was afraid that someone was trying to fish in troubled waters. Jiang Pingji snorted. Feng Zhen thought she didn't understand and explained, "Although those people were arrested, my lord, the relationship between the aristocratic families in Chongzhou is very complicated. They are either relatives or friends, or they are students and former officials. Not only are they friends, but they are also bound by blood ties that cannot be severed. Previously, they could still bear with it when they only locked up people. Now it's different. Lives are at stake. How can they sit still? Wen Zheng's danger is just the beginning. We don't know what will happen in the future." Jiang Pingji took a deep breath. She said calmly, "You're wrong. They will betray the country for their personal and family interests and collude with the northern borderline. Of course, they will also get close to me and abandon those abandoned children for the sake of making others jealous." Feng Zhen asked, "Then what does my lord mean?" Chapter 9:18. Feng Zhen smiled bitterly. This was indeed his lord's unique style of doing things. Killing was just a matter of nodding to the ground. The most troublesome part was dealing with the aftermath. Seeing Feng Zhen's expression, Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows and asked him, "Zisha doesn't agree?" Feng Zhen shook his head. It wasn't that he didn't agree, he was just worried. The aristocratic families in Chongzhou weren't big, but the relationships between them were very complicated. If the lord chose to cut them all off, it would cause more trouble. But if she didn't do anything about it, where would the lord's dignity be? "Why don't we just kill the bandit leaders?" Feng Zhen suggested against his will. He had been with Jiang Pingji for a long time, and his preferences had changed. Compared to intricate schemes, he preferred simple and violent methods. But as a strategist, he couldn't act on impulse. He had to prioritize the lord's interests. "There's no need. Just kill them all." Jiang Pingji's eyes shone with a cold glint. Letting a tiger return to the mountains will lead to endless trouble. In a place like Chongzhou, the temple is small but the wind is strong. The relationships between them are complicated. If we only kill the bandit leaders, it's the same as letting them preserve their strength. As long as they are alive, they can make a comeback if they seize the opportunity. Rather than that, we might as well kill them all. If we only kill the bandit leaders, the remaining people will still cause trouble. If that's the case, we might as well uproot them and not leave any future troubles. These families are a lesson to be learned from. Punish them harshly and let others see what happens when they betray the country. Since Jiang Pingji had said so, Feng Zhen naturally wouldn't object. He narrowed his eyes slyly and his lips curled into a scheming smile. In the days when Jiang Pingji wasn't around, he had suffered many grievances. Now that he could get back at her, how could he not be happy? Feng Zhen obeyed her orders and went to make arrangements. Only Jiang Pingji and the silent Qiguan Rang were left. "Are you all right? Does your wound still hurt?" Jiang Pingji asked softly. Qiguan Rang's stiff lips twitched. He said, "This time, I really suffered an unexpected disaster." Jiang Pingji understood the meaning behind his words. She restrained the smile on her lips and resumed her cold expression. Do you think the people who assassinated you were the aristocrats of Chongzhou or? Jiang Pingji asked Qiguanrang in a low voice. Qiguanrang thought for a while, his brows furrowed, and he said in a low voice, I'm afraid it's a borrowed knife to kill. On the surface, it's the aristocratic families of Chongzhou who have lost their minds and sent assassins, but in the dark there's another master. That person is extremely cautious. If I didn't take precautions in advance, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to find any clues. Jiang Pingji took a deep breath and suppressed the restlessness and anger in her heart. Qiguanrang continued, even so, that person did not leave behind any evidence. Rang is only suspicious. Jiang Pingji furrowed her brows. Her eyes seemed to be surging with a thick and frightening fierceness. Your Highness, you must not let your guard down. Qiguanrang clenched the feather fan in his hand and used it to knock on the table. It made a crisp sound and interrupted Jiang Pingji's train of thought. A little impatience will spoil a great plan. Let me think that the other party doesn't really want to take my life. It's most likely a test. Jiang Pingji raised her eyes and looked at Qiguanrang. You also think that person is testing us? What was there to test? To test whether Jiang Pingji had already discovered the other party's existence. If she was discovered, the conflict between the two would definitely surface. The other party could change his plan as soon as possible. If after the test he discovered that Jiang Pingji was still ignorant, the other party could be at ease and continue to lurk behind the scenes. I'm at least 70% sure. Qiguanrang waved his feather fan and lowered his eyes. Your Highness, you must be careful. Don't let the cat out of the bag. Jiang Pingji said, I will pretend that nothing happened. Let's see who can't hold back their anger first. Recently the atmosphere in Chongzhou was treacherous. It was as if it was shrouded in a layer of low pressure that made it hard for people to breathe. When everyone received the news of Jiang Pingji's return to Chongzhou, another piece of news spread. How dare she? When they first heard that Jiang Pingji wanted to wipe out the aristocratic families of Chongzhou who participated in the rebellion, the entire aristocratic circle boiled over. They had more or less heard about the few families, but they never thought that Lu Shi would be so ruthless as to wipe out their entire families. Why wouldn't she dare? Those few idiots were arrogant. While Lu Shi was not in Chongzhou, they secretly contacted the northern borderline. Now that Dongqing is no longer a country, they only did it for their own future. There is nothing wrong with it. Of all the things he should not have done, he should not have been discovered by Lu Shi. Now that the evidence is in his hands, do you think Lu Shi will be merciful and let them go? Some were furious while others looked on coldly from the sidelines. The former were filled with righteous indignation and felt sympathetic for the loss of their own kind. The latter were ultimately outsiders, calmly watching the situation in Chongzhou change. But how can we be in cahoots with such a ruthless person who massacred the aristocratic families? Do not punish the officials, do not punish the commoners. The original meaning of this sentence should be that the scholar officials should not receive preferential treatment in sentencing, and the commoners should not be excluded from etiquette. But as the times changed, this sentence became the golden medal and privilege of the aristocratic class. Now, it was twisted to mean that the scholar officials had the privilege of not being punished, and the commoners did not have the right to be treated with courtesy. Although the aristocratic families in Chongzhou were nouveau riches in the aristocratic circle, they were still above the commoners. Jiang Pingji wanted the lives of their entire clan because of the crime of secretly contacting the northern borderline. It was unreasonable. According to their thinking, a heavy punishment would suffice. Why would there be a need to resort to violence? Based on this woman will definitely lose the hearts of the people. Sooner or later she will die without a burial. Faced with such a statement, the clear-headed people smiled bitterly. They were very clear that as long as Lu Shi held the military power in his hands, the aristocratic families in Chongzhou would not be able to hurt her. A few scholars found Jiang Pingji together and advised her. They talked loudly, and the core meaning was that she was in the wrong. If it was a commoner who had colluded with the enemy and committed treason, they deserved to die. However, the person who had secretly contacted the northern borderline was an aristocratic family. They only needed to be taught a harsh lesson, fined and punished. There was no need to take their lives. Dongqing had a law. The aristocratic families could use enough money to exempt them from the death penalty. Even if it was a crime like secretly contacting the northern borderline, as long as they could afford it, they could be acquitted according to the law. Jiang Pingji looked at them coldly for a long time. After an hour, are you all thirsty? The scholars echoed each other. They were eloquent, but unfortunately there was a hole in their brains. The scholars bowed to Jiang Pingji and stood proudly on the spot. They said, "Magistrate Liu, please reconsider." Jiang Pingji said coldly, "Looks like you're not thirsty. That's fine. I don't want to throw you into the well in the backyard and dirty my water. Someone throw out these fellows who have an undeserved reputation. From now on, if they dare to come to our door again, break their legs." After the scholars heard this, their faces turned ashen. Jiang Pingji narrowed her eyes dangerously. "Throw them out." The scholars wanted to say something, but when they saw the guards in armor and brandishing their blades, they were as quiet as chickens, not daring to make a sound. It was at this moment that Fu Wang and Li Yun stepped in with a bloody aura. The scholars saw them and felt uneasy. "Is it done?" Jiang Pingji asked. Chapter 9:19. Jiang Pingji was also afraid that a long delay would bring trouble. After making up her mind, she let Fu Wang and Li Yun lead the troops to confiscate the houses and arrest the people. According to Dongqing's practice, confiscating property and exterminating 3 clans meant confiscating property. Confiscating property was easy to understand. It was nothing more than confiscating all property, including land, real estate, gold and silver, slave contracts. Exterminating 3 clans referred to the paternal, maternal and wife clans. If Dongqing's imperial power was stable, something as big as confiscating property and exterminating a clan needed the permission of the court. However, Dongqing was now ruled by the emperor. It was good enough that one edict could affect the entire imperial city. Why would Jiang Pingji care about him? Confiscating property and exterminating a clan was something she could do. However, she did not go too far. According to Dongqing's current laws, exterminating a clan was a rule. The offenders and the men in the family would all be executed. The women could be exempted from the death penalty. However, they would be made prostitutes for the officials or sent to the army as camp prostitutes. This outcome was even more horrifying than death. Jiang Pingji would rather give them a quick death. She did not want to use such methods to humiliate a group of weak women. After thinking about it, Jiang Pingji said, "Get someone to register all these women and demote them to commoners. Send them back to their parents' homes in private." The atmosphere in Chongzhou was more open. Women would not crazily treat men as their sky, let alone follow the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Jiang Pingji gave them a way out and did not take their lives. She only sent them back to their parents' homes. This was already a great kindness. When the limelight was over, they could still get married again. By doing so, she subtly pacified the women's families so that they could not vent their anger. The catastrophe in Chongzhou lasted for more than a month. From the top to the bottom, everyone was in danger. While the gentry in Chongzhou were anxious and fearful, the Chui family who had long boarded Jiang Pingji's pirate ship, were happy to see their teeth but not their eyes. The head of the Chui family, Chui Yu, even chatted with his friends in private. He said that this was the most successful business he had ever done. Although they gave up the land, they reaped even more benefits. The returns were far higher than the costs. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the first year of Qingzong. It had been a year since Jiang Pingji took over Chongzhou. In the past year, she had gone from being looked down upon to being a great demon that everyone feared. She had Chongzhou in her hands. As for Yang Si, who had been thrown to Hu County by Jiang Pingji, he was even more impressive. He took over the administrative affairs of Hu County perfectly. Of course, it would be better if he could stop complaining and focus on working overtime. There were turbulent times outside, and there were dukes fighting during the new year. Only the territory under Jiang Pingji's rule was peaceful. Well, maybe it was too peaceful, which made people envious and jealous. Over the past year, Jiang Pingji had steadily strengthened herself, and the other feudal vassal forces had not been idle either. As the end of the year approached, a secret letter was delivered to Jiang Pingji. She was so shocked that she slammed the table after reading it. Like father like son, Yang Tao has done a good job. Feng Zhen almost had a heart attack because of Jiang Pingji. Next time, could he at least give him a heads up before making a fuss so that he could be mentally prepared? Yang Tao? Isn't that the son of the late Dongmen commandant Yang Jian? Qiguan Rang frowned slightly. Seeing Jiang Pingji's face full of admiration, he thought about the situation outside and had some guesses in his heart. During the alliance meeting at Huangshui, Qiguan Rang felt that Yang Tao was not an ordinary person. It was not surprising that he had turned into a dragon after meeting water. Feng Zhen said, "I remember hearing news about Yang Tao a while ago. After Yang Jian died, he turned to the false emperor. However, Yang Tao is not a man without ambition. His father, Yang Jian, had a disagreement with the false emperor. According to the false emperor's temperament, he would not treat Yang Tao kindly." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, A month ago Yang Tao launched a coup. The false emperor retreated in defeat. Now he has fled to Nanxing. Coup? Even though they had expected it, Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen were still shocked when they heard the truth. Zhangzhou was the false emperor's territory. Yang Tao's father Yang Jian had offended the false emperor. It was good enough that Yang Tao could keep his life. They did not expect this fellow to play the pig to eat the tiger without saying a word. He launched a coup right under the false emperor's nose and turned from guest to host. The false emperor seemed to have magnanimously accepted Yang Tao's defection, but he had been secretly targeting him. He did not even allow Yang Tao to touch military power. Yang Tao was aware of the situation he was in. He secretly formed an alliance with the court officials who were not loyal to the false emperor. They planned carefully and looked for a good opportunity to strike. A month ago, the false emperor brought his court officials and children to worship the heavens. Under Yan Lin's suggestion, Yang Tao claimed to be sick half a month earlier. He secretly quickened his pace. The sacrificial ceremony was solemn and grand. Elegant music was melodious and sonorous. The false emperor was immersed in his own imagination. He never expected that Yang Tao, who he thought was completely useless, would show his sharp teeth at this moment. Under Yan Lin's orderly command, the coup was like a thunderstorm. Everyone was at a loss as to what to do. Yang Tao's 3,000 men of sacrifice became the decisive force in the coup. Yan Lin forged documents and military orders, mobilized troops from all sides, and controlled the armory and key departments. Before the false emperor, Prince Changshu, could react, they were already surrounded at the place where the sacrificial ceremony was held. By the time the false emperor wanted to mobilize troops to defend himself, it was already too late. A figure flashed across Qiguan Rang's mind. He said, "It's obvious that this was a premeditated coup. The person who set it up was shrewd and ruthless. He was very good at playing with people's hearts. He was obviously at a disadvantage, but he was able to take advantage of every opportunity to attack the false emperor again and again. He made it impossible for the false emperor to calm down. Yang Tao was brave, but he lacked strategy. Even though he had grown a little after Yang Jian's death, he was still far from being as shrewd as the false emperor. In my opinion, all of this must have been done by an expert. I can't think of anyone else other than Yan Lin." Qiguan Rang's eyes flashed with coldness as he thought about this. He knew that Yan Lin was not a simple man, but he didn't expect him to be so capable. He had helped Yang Tao turn the tables from a disadvantageous position to an advantage. Now he could control the entire Zhangzhou effortlessly. What a pity. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have let Yan Lin live. Jiang Pingji said calmly, "I also think that he was the one behind all of this. I have to say that he is indeed a meticulous and shrewd person. But he was able to help Yang Tao turn the tables. It was 50% strength and 50% luck. If it weren't for the fact that the Mengs in Zhangzhou realized that they couldn't help the false emperor and withdrew their troops back to Zhangzhou, Yan Lin wouldn't have been able to do this alone. This is fate." Qiguan Rang said, "I'm afraid he will be a formidable opponent." "What are you afraid of?" Jiang Pingji said, "One person's energy is limited. No matter how capable Yan Lin was, he wasn't a god." Jiang Pingji stayed in the north, but the forces in the south of Dongqing were constantly changing. Yang Tao turned the tables and took over Zhangzhou. Huang Song, who was in Haozhou, didn't want to be outdone either. He took over the entire Haozhou. The Su brothers in Zhe County fought amongst themselves for a while. It was hard to tell who would win. In the end, they all set their sights on their old neighbor, Hu County. The chief of Hu County was Wuma Shang, an old friend from the Huangshui meeting. Chapter 920. The mountains and rivers of his old country had been destroyed, and the people's lives were in dire straits. And Shui thought that he could rely on his military strength to reclaim his old country, but he had greatly underestimated the situation within Nanxing. Nanxing Jiangzhou. The barbarians of the four factions of Nanman only knew how to plunder and didn't know how to govern. Wherever they conquered, they would plunder and kill wantonly. He came empty-handed, but he left with a lot of money. Countless human heads and weeping women hung on the back of his horse. The heads were evidence of their military strength, and the women were spoils of war for them to vent their desires and show off their power. And Shui wandered to Dongqing, and only managed to gather 6,000 men after much scheming. He thought that he had some confidence, but the situation in Nanxing was far worse than when he left. The aristocratic families and commoners couldn't stand the violence of Nanman and rose up in revolt. If they focused on the outside world, Nanxing might still be saved, but the enemies had yet to retreat and civil war had broken out. and Shui brought 6,000 men and sufficient rations to support Jiangzhou of Nanxing. He was originally from Jiangzhou of Nanxing. This wasn't just his homeland, but also where Madame Anne had built her connections. If he developed in Jiangzhou, not only could he use Madame Anne's remaining connections, but he could also get help from his old friends. In the beginning, Shui's development was not bad. He used the teachings of the Red Lotus Group to recruit many militias and strengthen himself. But he quickly ran into a wall. Because of this, Shui lost more than half of his troops, and only 3,000 were left. Other than Shui, there were 2 other aristocratic families and a militia force in Jiangzhou. Shui chose to work with the aristocratic family that was on good terms with Madame Anne, but unexpectedly they had ulterior motives. Although Shui was intelligent, he wasn't good at scheming. He was unknowingly tricked by the other party. Shui and Duoshi. Shui meant worry. The elders had given Shui the nickname Duoshi. It sounded tacky, but it was full of good wishes. They knew that this person was destined to have a difficult life. In his previous life he had toiled for more than a decade, and in the end he had risked everything to ask Wuxia for help. He had taken over half of Nanxing. Now he wasn't as down and out as he would be in the future, but he was still unlucky. Although he was from Nanxing, the troops he brought were all from Dongqing. In the eyes of the feudal lords in Nanxing, Shui was not on the right side. How could an outsider fight with them for power? If it wasn't a pretense, then it was the thought of using Shui to do his dirty work. He only treated Shui as a spear. At first, Shui did not realize this. When he ran into a wall and lost half of his troops, he suddenly realized. Shui had just passed the age of 30, so he could still withstand such a blow. However, his eyes couldn't help but turn red. However, after this setback he also realized his shortcomings. He couldn't outcalculate others, and he didn't have a strategist by his side. His sworn brothers were also impulsive people. Such a combination could be easily manipulated by others, and the slightest provocation could ruin the whole thing. Shui thought for a moment. He planned to use his old friendship to invite a famous scholar to help him. However, Shui had no manpower, no land, and no money. Moreover, she had just suffered a defeat. Who would be willing to assist a lord like this? Even if Shui's status was illustrious, the entire family had been wiped out by the barbarians, and Shui's wife and children had even been humiliated and killed by the barbarians. Was such a failed man worthy of the loyalty of others? Thus, every time Shui came to invite them, many famous people would either avoid meeting him or refuse him. Shui was not a thick-skinned person. He knew that others did not like his conditions, so he could only return resentfully. On one hand he led his subordinates to seek refuge everywhere, and on the other he looked for a chance to turn things around. Finally he found his chance. I heard that Master Yuanjing's disciple is traveling nearby to study, Shui's eyes burned. He remembered the performance of Master Yuanjing's first disciple, Qing Jing, during the Huangshui meeting. The fire in his heart burned even more. Traveling? What's going on here? Which idiot came here to study? My lord, did you hear wrongly? Although Dongqing was chaotic, it was not as chaotic as Nanxing. There were barbarians everywhere who wreaked havoc and plundered. A scholar traveling to a war-torn country to study was not traveling thousands of miles to read thousands of books. It was clearly rushing to find the king of hell to reincarnate. Shui said, whether it's true or not, we should at least give it a try. The subordinates beside him were nervous. They really did not think highly of Shui's plan. Shui smiled. Master Yuanjing has a total of 4 disciples. His first disciple, Qingjing Qingyumo, now works for Huangsong of Haozhou. His youngest disciple, Wuxia Zhixiao, works for Lu Shi of Wanzhou. The remaining 2 are Han Yu Han Wenbin and Lu Zheng Lu Xiaoyin. I heard that Han Yu has accepted the appointment of Su Bei, the eldest grandson of the Su family in Zhi County of Dongqing. Then the remaining one. Lu Zheng? Never heard of him. Everyone shook their heads like a rattled drum. Lu Zheng was really not famous. Among Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples, Qing Jing and Han Yu were from the famous Langya family. Wei Xi's status was slightly lower, and Lu Zheng was the son of a hunter. Shui had never heard of Lu Zheng's name, but he had tried to get close to Qing Jing during the Huangshui meeting. After asking around, he found out the names of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. I have a chance because I have never heard of him. Shui took a deep breath and said, I heard that Lu Zheng intends to visit the governor of Jiang Prefecture. The governor of Jiang Prefecture is my childhood friend. I know his temperament very well. He has a very strong sense of family background, but he does a good job on the surface. He won't look down on Lu Zheng in front of him, nor will he chase him away. For the sake of being wise, he will even put on a show and appoint Lu Zheng. But according to my understanding of the governor of Jiang Prefecture, he will never put the son of a hunter in an important position. Master Yuanjing's disciple must have something special about him, and his temperament must be more arrogant than ordinary people. In my opinion, Lu Zheng will definitely not be able to accept such cold treatment. In other words, Lu Zheng's setback gave Shui a chance to enter the governor's eyes. A few subordinates listened to Shui's words. They did not say anything on the surface, but they were secretly disapproving. In their opinion, there must be something wrong with a scholar who went to a war-torn country to study. However, his lord liked him and wanted to recruit him wholeheartedly. It turned out that Shui's guess was right. Unexpectedly, Lu Zheng also saw that the governor of Jiang Prefecture was not reliable. He rejected the governor's appointment and continued to study. Shui was anxious and immediately paid a visit with generous gifts. "I won't see you." Lu Zheng wore a wide-sleeved cloak and a cloth scarf on his head. He was unadorned and looked like a poor scholar. The boy servant blinked and said, "Sir, this is his second time. I won't see him even if he comes 20 times, much less 2 times. Lu Zheng narrowed his eyes. He had grown a beard now. Although his face was still tender, he was far more mature than before. The boy servant raised his head and said, "In ancient times, there were 3 attendants who came out of the mountains. Sir, you won't move even after 20 attendants? Study well and don't drop your bag. You'll make me feel awkward." The boy servant stuck out his tongue and followed Lu Zheng obediently. He did not dare to let Shui enter again. "Why don't you like him, sir? The timing is not right. He still has the arrogance of a landowning household. That alone makes him unworthy of my consideration. Then when will it be enough?" Chapter 921. Back then, during the earthquake in Dongqing, the Tsingyi army and the Red Lotus group rose up in revolt and wreaked havoc in the north. At that time, the common people all moved their families to the south to escape the chaos of war. Now that several years had passed, the situation had changed. The north was peaceful, while the outside world was in full swing. There were even dukes fighting each other during the new year. When the group arrived at the latrine where Hu County Chief Wuma Shang had drowned, his body was covered in feces and crawling with maggots. They couldn't help but sigh. Wuma Shang was a member of the royal family, a descendant of the heavens. He ended up like this in his middle age. I know. I heard that this person almost became emperor. He was one of the top figures in the 20-some Dukes alliance at Huang River. Who knew that he would die a violent death? The scholar paused and continued, "Do you know why his body was found in the latrine pit? Is there an inside story?" His companion asked curiously. "Of course there is," the scholar said. "I heard that the Su brothers from Zhe County were locked in a fierce battle and had endless internal strife. Just then, Wuma Shang wanted to take advantage of the conflict between the Su brothers and take advantage of it. Who knew that the Su brothers would unite against the outsiders and send troops to attack Hu County after the new year. When the army attacked, Hu County Chief Wuma Shang was still doing it with his beautiful concubine. When he heard the news that the enemy had attacked, he was so scared that he lost his horse. His concubine and servants only cared about their own lives. They hurriedly threw his body into the latrine in the backyard. It was said that after losing his horse, he regained his final radiance and watched helplessly as he was thrown into the latrine and drowned. The so-called horse death, also known as sudden death during intercourse, was also known as withdrawal syndrome. It was an unexpected death caused by sexual activity. The scholar described it vividly as if he had seen it with his own eyes. This is really pitiful." His companion was speechless for a long time. After a while he asked again, "But there is one thing I don't understand. I heard that the Su brothers from Zhe County have always been at odds with each other. Why did they put aside their differences and join forces to attack Hu County? If the 2 brothers hadn't caused such a ruckus, Hu County Chief Wuma Shang wouldn't have been so defenseless. I have a feeling that there must be an expert guiding us to attack Hu County at this time after the new year." Wuma Shang had been planning to reap the benefits from the fight, but he never expected that his brothers, who had been at each other's throats just a second ago, would stab him in the back in the next second. It was too sudden. Who in the world did not know of the grudge between the 2 brothers, Su Bei and Su Fei? Rumor has it that it was Han Yu, Su Pei's strategist, who had repeatedly asked for advice and even risked his life to persuade Su Fei. Only then did the collaboration come about. Han Yu. This name sounds a bit familiar. Wait, I remember now. Isn't Han Yu the 3rd rank in Tian Wu's 15-year assessment? In that year's assessment, Master Yuanjing's disciple took the top 2 spots. If Dongqing had not fallen apart, perhaps these 2 people would still be the pillars of the country. Otherwise, why would people say that Master Yuanjing is powerful? None of his disciples are easy to provoke. The 2 of them drank several cups of wine and soon they were drunk. So, now that the world is in chaos, I wonder how many more times we can see such prosperity. They sat by the window on the 2nd floor of the tea house. From this position they could clearly see the bustling crowd downstairs. Just after the new year, the closed market had reopened, and the people's faces were still filled with unfinished joy. Thinking about the outside world, such a prosperous scene was really rare. So what if he was one of the feudal lords? Just look at Wumashang and you will know the fate of the loser. Wumashang was based in Hu County. Although the area of Hu County was not as large as Wanzhou, it was still 2/3 of the county. It was also a good place with fertile farmland. Wumashang had a good card in his hand, but his opponent was too strong. In the end he ended up drowning in a latrine. Isn't that a child from the academy next door? As he drank his wine happily, a rather unlucky blue and white color entered his line of sight. The scholar furrowed his brows. In Wanzhou, only the students of the Golden Scale Academy could wear such clothes outside. The Golden Scale Pavilion was open to the public, attracting countless students from thousands of miles away to study, further increasing the prosperity of Wanzhou. In this era books were precious. The students drooled over the countless books, wishing that they could stay here for the rest of their lives. Who would be willing to move? The slightly wealthier scholars directly bought houses, the poorer ones rented, and the poorer ones had to share a house with several people. After living here for a long time, they also felt a sense of belonging to the Golden Scale Pavilion. Many people jokingly called the Golden Scale Academy the academy next door, and their words carried a hint of intimacy. Why did these children come to the Golden Scale Pavilion? In the eyes of the crowd, 6 or 7-year-old children were disgusted by cats and dogs. They came to the Golden Scale Pavilion and destroyed the valuable books. Stop. This isn't a place for children like you. Leave quickly. More than 10 children wore the Golden Scale Academy's uniform of blue and white. They were both boys and girls. Not all of them looked good, but at least they kept themselves clean. Perhaps because they thought it was unlucky for children to dress like this during the new year, everyone wore red silk flowers on their heads and a red cloak over their heads. Even though they were dressed like this, the crowd could still recognize their signature blue and white uniforms. The Golden Scale Pavilion doesn't care about identity or background. Why can't I go in? The leading child looked to be around 8 or 9 years old. He looked weak, but his brows were clear. Was Feng? He wasn't angry when he was stopped. He just tried to reason with the other party in a well-behaved manner. Hey, have you finished learning how to read? The books in the Golden Scale Pavilion are precious. It's not a place for children like you to play. The scholars of the Golden Scale Pavilion were not unreasonable. They didn't treat the children badly. However, their stance was firm. Little children couldn't enter the Golden Scale Pavilion. I'm not going to bother with you, Feng said. He bypassed that person and took out his token to hand over to the guard of the Golden Scale Pavilion. The students who followed him lined up to be enthroned. The scholars thought that the guard would stop this group of mischievous children. They didn't expect. Why are they allowed to go in? The scholar widened his eyes in shock. Aren't they afraid that this group of mischievous children would cause a ruckus and burn the entire Golden Scale Pavilion? The guard said, they can go in anyway. On the other side, Feng Yi led his people and ran towards the main hall of the Golden Scale Pavilion. Although they were small in number, they had a lot of people. When they walked together, they looked imposing. Feng Dalong, what should we do next? The girl's voice was tender. She looked fair and plump, like a jade sculpture. She was known as the flower of the Golden Scale Academy. Who else could she be but Feng Jin's Changxing? Brother. Feng Yi was angry. The Changxing who called him Brother Feng sweetly just now called him Feng Dalong the moment they met. Okay, my good brother. Feng Yi was speechless. Remember, show us the imposing manner of challenging the arena. We might lose, but we can't lose. After entering the main hall of the Golden Scale Pavilion, the 15 uniformly dressed children became a strange sight. They attracted the attention of everyone present. The other students were still a little frightened. However, Feng Yi straightened his back and borrowed books from the maidservant expressionlessly. The busybody eavesdropped. The scholars couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 922. Changxing's ears were sharp. She snorted softly, pouted her mouth and complained to Feng Yi. Feng Dalong, they said we can't understand. After saying that, Changxing rolled up her wide sleeves. She had just rolled up one sleeve with great effort, and the other slipped down her arm. Therefore Changxing pouted and quietly squatted on the mat. She lowered her head and struggled to adjust her sleeves. Feng Yi's eyes slanted, and he looked down at Changxing, who was panting with anger. He felt inexplicably tired. Was this what she meant by losing but not losing the battle? Come here, I'll help you tuck it in. Feng Yi waved at Changxing, and the chubby little boy happily moved over. The scholars saw that the children were so friendly and they looked good. Under the double filter they could not help but like them a little. A noisy child is a little devil and a quiet child is a little angel. After watching for a while, the scholars went to do their own things, and occasionally looked at the little children. The books of Golden Scale Pavilion were all printed on Xian paper or bamboo paper. Even if they were immersed in reading all day long, the impression that paper books were too precious had been formed. If a naughty child tore one, they would faint from heartache. Feng Yi rolled up Changxing's sleeves, and the maidservant of Golden Scale Pavilion brought the books they needed. He curled his lips into a smile. Thank you. 15 little children surrounded a large table, and each of them sat upright. There was a book spread out in front of them, and they were reading with serious expressions. The scholars who came and went saw this scene and they found it a little funny. They pretended to be good, and people who did not know would think that these children were really literate. Changxing could not sit still after sitting for a while. She twisted her butt, moved her knees and rubbed from her mat to Feng Yi's mat. Feng Delong, I can't read these words. Feng Yi took a look and it turned out to be a few relatively rare words. For Changxing, who could only read half of the words, it was indeed very difficult. I'll teach you. Feng Yi used his finger to draw a few characters on the paper, and for Changxing to read, he even repeated it twice. Changxing muttered, but she could not find the correct pronunciation after several times, and her face wrinkled. She had only studied in Golden Scale Academy for 3 months, and she was proficient in pinyin, but not proficient in using it. Feng Yi was not in a hurry and patiently waited for her to read it. The scholars who were observing the situation found it funny and asked, Little lady, what words do you not know? I can teach you. Feng Yi squinted his eyes, frivolous. Changxing raised her head. Most of her hair covered her forehead, making her little face look even rounder. The scholars laughed. Dalong is the little brother next to you? The scholar smiled and said, Feng Dalong is this little brother beside you? He is still and does not know as. He was already so old, yet he still wanted to coax Changxing to call him brother. Shameless. And because Dalong and father. Dal and. Do you know what a challenge is? It is very powerful, 1 against 10. Dalong's father is also very powerful. Dalong will be as powerful in the future. The scholar listened to Changxing and he could not help but smile. Even though Changxing tried her best to explain, outsiders who did not understand the situation would only be confused. The only thing that could be understood was the challenge. Your Feng Dalong is still too young. The brothers here are all adults and they do not beat children. Changxing tilted her head and looked at the scholar and then at Feng Yi. Dalong was indeed not as tall as the others and not as strong. How could he beat them? Changxing looked at Feng Yi with grievance, as if he was really facing the prospect of being beaten up. Feng Yi bowed to the scholar and said politely, I still have to learn from a few classmates, please help yourself. The scholar refused to leave. You are only at the age of Zhangjiao, and you just finished reading Great Xia Rhyming Book, right? According to the current education progress, it was already very good for a 7 or 8-year-old child to finish reading Great Xia Rhyming Book. I am not talented, and I have finished reading Great Xia Rhyming Book. Now I am learning 300,000 from the teachers, and the Book of Songs and the Analects of Confucius in spring. The scholar said, What is 300,000? The texts taught by the college students. He asked Feng Yi again, How old are you? Can you understand the Analects of Confucius? And you are learning the Book of Songs? Although I don't understand, I have already memorized it. As a top student, how could he not prepare in advance? The scholar was speechless. Kids nowadays were really amazing and they could boast to the sky. Which brat could be so good? You said that you have already memorized it? Feng Yi was silent for a moment and he said, I have memorized the original text, but I have only read the annotations written by the teachers a few times, and I have only memorized it. The Analects of Confucius was easy to memorize, but the Book of Songs was a little difficult for Feng Yi. It was said that the art of war would be taught next semester, and Feng Yi was more interested in that. The scholar was speechless. Boast. Keep boasting. Brats nowadays did not even follow the basic rules when they boasted. How could a brat's parent not know? Did he really think that he had a genius son? Since that is the case, let me test you. The scholar felt that bragging kids needed to be taught a lesson, or else what if they became second nature to lying in the future? Dear brother, please give me some pointers. Feng Yi raised his hand to signal the other students to continue reading, while he faced the challenge in front of him calmly. Sage Confucius had a student named Bo Shang, and his courtesy name was Zixia. He once said, "Parents, monarch, friend, which one do you know?" Feng Yi said without hesitation, "When it comes to parents, one can do one's best. When it comes to monarch, one can do one's best. When it comes to friends, one must keep one's word." The scholar did not expect Feng Yi to be able to answer, and he made things difficult for him. When it comes to friends, one must keep one's word. What do you mean by this? When it comes to friends, one must be honest and sincere, and scrupulously keep one's word. The scholar was speechless. His original intention was to use this to mock Feng Yi for boasting at such a young age, but now he felt a little embarrassed. The scholar did not believe him, and he asked again. The disciple that Sage Confucius was most proud of was called Yan Zi, and his courtesy name was Xian. Sage Confucius repeatedly praised him, saying that he was studious, benevolent, and even said that he had 4 virtues. Do you know which 4 virtues it is? What is Yan Hui's lifelong desire? The 4 virtues of a gentleman are strong in doing righteousness, weak in accepting advice, fearful of salary, and cautious in governing oneself. Teacher, please mark this passage as firm when doing righteousness, gentle when accepting advice, cautious when getting an official's salary, and cautious when cultivating oneself. Feng Yi continued, as for what Sage Yan Zi's lifelong desire, this kid boldly thinks that it is definitely a prosperous age where the monarch and his subjects are united, people live in harmony, people of all ages are healthy, and the world is peaceful. The scholar began to pay attention now, and those who were paying attention to the commotion here were also attracted over. The scholar continued to ask, "Why do you say so?" Chapter 923. There was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. As a scholar who was well-read, it was a great shame that he could not defeat a young child. The scholar rolled his eyes. He still wanted to test Feng Yi. However, he did not want to test the Analects of Confucius, but the Book of Songs. The Analects of Confucius recorded the words and deeds of Sage Kong and his disciples. It was one of the most classic works of Confucianism, but it was not long. Most of it was quotations and dialogues, so it was not too difficult to memorize. The Book of Songs was different. Not to mention the length, just the jerky content was very difficult to memorize. Only when one was slightly older and knew more things would it be easier to learn. The little child in front of him was only at the age of young. He could not possibly remember all the rare words and content in the Book of Songs, right? I won't test you too hard. Just memorize curly ear. Before Feng Yi could speak, Changxing, who was at the side, quickly raised her hand. Changxing can also recite this poem. You can recite it? The scholar was surprised and turned to look at the chubby Changxing, then recite it once. Don't be fooled by the short length of curly ears, it had many uncommon words. Changxing wanted to recite while shaking her head, but Feng Yi held her cheeks with both hands. Sit up straight and shake your head. It's a loss of etiquette. Changxing maintained this posture and recited the entire rolling ears, as if she was pouring beans. Picking and rolling ears, not filling the basket in an instant. Sai, I carry the person Zhou Xing. Jichui Wei, I carry the horse and horse. I drink from the golden basket so that I won't forget forever. The scholar's eyes widened when he heard it. He did not expect a 3 or 4-year-old girl to be able to recite the entire curly ear. Although she was not fluent, every word was enunciated clearly. Was the girl in front of him a demon? Then do you know what this curly ear is about? As soon as the scholar's voice fell, Feng Yi's eyes became sharp and she glared at him. The first chapter of Curly Ear was about a woman collecting curly ears and thinking of her husband who was far away. Then she expressed her longing in the tone of a hard-working man. Although Curly Ear had a deeper meaning on the surface, it was not suitable for children to understand. Changxing did not know this. She said happily, Changxing knows? It's about a young lady who picks mushrooms. After the scholar asked, he regretted it. When he heard Changxing's answer, he almost burst out laughing. A little girl picking mushrooms? This answer was also unique. Feng Yi said, My dear friend, please be careful with your words. Changxing is young and ignorant, but you are no longer a 3-year-old child. The scholar's face turned red. He also knew that he was wrong just now. After being shocked by Feng Yi and Changxing one after another, he already believed that this group of radishes in front of him could really read. I remember that all of you are students of the Golden Scale Academy, right? The outside world was clear about the background of the students of the Golden Scale Academy. Nominally, they were the orphans of heroes, but to put it bluntly, they were the children of poor people. How could a child from such a family have any foundation? The Golden Scale Academy was established only a few days earlier than the Golden Scale Pavilion. In other words, these kids who had no foundation had only learned to read and write for less than a year. In such a short period of time, they were already able to stop reading Great Xia Rhyme? What was the purpose of Golden Scale Academy? The scholar asked a question that everyone else was curious about. What do you learn from your teachers in the academy on normal days? Feng Yi said one by one respectfully. Apart from the 300,000 at the beginning, they also had to learn arithmetic. Before learning arithmetic, they had to memorize the 9-9 arithmetic formula. The teachers told them that after learning the basics, they had to come into contact with the classics and historical collections. Apart from that, according to their different talents, they had to learn the 4 arts, chess, calligraphy, and so on. Wait, what is 300,000 ? 3-character classic, 100 family names, 1,000-character classic. The scholar's expression became strange. The Golden Scale Pavilion also had these 3 sets of books, and he had read them when he was bored. He had to admit that if it was used to teach young children, it was indeed an excellent book. However, why didn't they learn Great Xia Rhyme? The scholar asked this question. Feng Yi said, the teachers don't teach Great Xia Rhyme, they teach Chinese New Rhyme. Chinese New Rhyme, what was this? Everyone was suspicious. They had never heard of this thing. Feng Yi took out her class notebook, which was cut out of bamboo paper, which made the others envious. Some of them were so poor that they couldn't even afford a brush, ink, and bamboo slips. The little boy used expensive bamboo paper to make drafts and notes. The scholar took over Feng Yi's notebook and found that this boy's handwriting was very good. Every word was upright and had a strong style. The strange thing was, apart from the words he was familiar with, there was a string of strange symbols near some rare words. Look at the last page. Feng Yi reminded. That person raised his hand and turned to the last page, and found that there were dozens of symbols on the page, which were exactly the symbols he had just seen. This is the rhyme symbol of Chinese New Rhyme. The teachers teach us to use these symbols to spell out the pronunciation of unfamiliar words. The scholar was confused. Even though he had been in the Golden Scale Pavilion for half a year, he had never seen Chinese New Rhyme, nor had he seen these symbols. What kind of scribbles are these? Changxing said in surprise. You don't understand? But didn't the teachers say that everyone has to learn it? The scholar's cheeks turned red. He really hadn't learned it before. He secretly glanced at the children present and found that they were all using the so-called rhyme symbol to mark the pronunciation. They obviously didn't know the word, but when they asked Feng Yi and Feng Yi drew the rhyme symbol for them, they could pronounce it correctly. Suddenly the scholar was curious. What exactly was this rhyme symbol of Chinese New Rhyme? Not only that, he also heard a conversation between a few little boys. They were talking about Fang Tian's math problems in 9 chapters of arithmetic. He stretched his neck to take a look and found that there was a piece of paper on the table of these few children. There were 10 math problems listed on the paper. They were the problems in 9 chapters of arithmetic. The scholar saw that the children were frowning and thinking hard. He found it funny and decided to help them. Who knew that after the children finished calculating 10 problems, he could only calculate the second one. He thought that the children were calculating blindly, so he was unconvinced and proofread the answers with the other party. They were exactly the same. The scholar was speechless. Could it be that he had been cheated? That the students of the Golden Scale Academy were actually not ordinary people, and that each of them had received enlightenment education? This group of little boys in blue and white clothes were too eye-catching. They could always attract curious students to come and join in the fun. Everyone that came was startled. After half a day, the students who were permanently stationed in the Golden Scale Pavilion knew that the little boys from the neighboring academy were not simple. As for the Chinese New Rhyme that the children were talking about, they were even more shocked. The children were young, so others would have lower expectations of them. If it was someone of the same age who came to the Golden Scale Pavilion to promote, he would have been besieged by a group of scholars and had to fight with them one after another. If it was this group of children with an average age of 6, not only would they not fight, but they would also put the children at the level of child prodigies. Chapter 924. I thought my lord was fooling around. I didn't expect it to be so effective. Wan Xian sighed. He thought that the implementation of new rhymes of Chinese would cause a lot of controversy. However, the students from the Golden Scale Academy went to challenge the Golden Scale Pavilion and used the practical effect to suppress the arrogant students. After the actual implementation, the effect was much better than expected. If new rhymes of Chinese can be implemented, many people in the world will benefit from it. Ching Ching smiled and stroked his beard. He also heard about the performance of the students from the Golden Scale Academy. As a teacher, he was proud of himself. Yes. Wan Xian laughed heartily and swept away the haze. He escaped from Zhongzhou to Dongqing with Xie Qian and settled down in Wanzhou. At first he was at a loss. Now he found a new goal in life and lived a fulfilling life. Although he was middle-aged, his spirit was abnormally high and did not lose to young people. The two of them joked. Ching Ching noticed that Master Yuanjing was silent and frowned as if he had encountered a problem. Master Yuanjing, what's bothering you? Wan Xian asked with concern. Feng Ren, who heard the noise, put down the book in his hand and looked up at Master Yuanjing. Master Yuanjing came back to his senses and forced a smile. I suddenly thought of something. Feng Ren asked, what is it? It was not a simple thing to make Master Yuanjing look worried. Yuanjing said, yesterday my student Tang Zuda came to ask me about something. Thinking about it, what he said made sense. New rhymes of Chinese uses rhyme marks to mark pronunciations. It is simple and easy to learn, but Zuda is worried about one thing. If all the people in the world learn simple rhyme marks and replace the existing characters with rhyme marks, I'm afraid that no one will be willing to learn Chinese. Tang Yao was not the only one who was confused about this. Many students from the Golden Scale Pavilion also questioned it. They had to admit that this question was very tricky. Everyone froze on the spot. They agreed with the rhyme marks in new rhymes of Chinese because these rhyme marks could help people read and recognize characters. But if the people were only willing to learn simple rhyme marks and gave up learning the more difficult Chinese characters, what should they do? Ching Ching and the others pondered for a while. Wan Xian seemed to have thought of something and his brows relaxed. I don't think it's possible. Wan Xian smiled and said, Chinese characters are broad and profound. It's a cultural treasure and an unparalleled wealth. There are many Chinese characters with the same sound but different characters with different meanings. How can a few rhymes replace them perfectly? When Master Yuanjing heard this, he was suddenly enlightened. He patted his forehead and laughed at himself. I'm old and my brain is useless. If not for Changzhai's guidance, I'm afraid that I would have continued to be stuck in a dead end. Everyone was talking and laughing and the atmosphere became peaceful again. Wan Xian wrote a long poem before the doubts of the outside world grew stronger. The content of the long poem used Mr. Yuanjing's doubts as an entry point. The moment it started, it caught everyone's attention. What kind of question was it that even Master Yuanjing, who was an expert in the field of education, was puzzled? As he continued to read, the entire long poem flowed smoothly like the clouds and flowing water. Reading it to one's heart's content, and in the end he still felt like he hadn't had enough. However, it also perfectly dispelled the doubts of the scholars. They happily studied the newly published New Rhymes of Chinese by Wanzhou Bookstore. When the students of the Golden Scale Pavilion all recognized New Rhymes of Chinese, Wanzhou Bookstore printed more copies and sent it to the hands of the world's famous scholars through various channels. It was for no other reason than to show off. Although this method was very shameless, it did indeed attract more scholars and famous scholars to Wanzhou. When the other feudal vassals realized the signs, the situation was already out of control. They slapped their thighs. Oh no, all the talents have gone to Wanzhou. Although they're only going there to study, there's no guarantee that they won't be recruited. The talents they've chosen are all leftovers from Wanzhou. They're inferior. How are they going to fight Lu Shi of Wanzhou? Beat him with their heads? Or influence him with love? Because of this, rumors of the feudal vassals being courteous to the wise came out one after another. For example, they would meet someone cordially today, sleep with someone tomorrow, or talk all night with someone else the day after. It was quite coquettish just to attract the little bees called talents. Regarding this, the feudal vassals also expressed their heartache. Lu Shi, at least take it easy and leave a bite of the cake. Because of the Golden Scale Pavilion and Wanzhou Bookstore, Jiang Pingji's lack of talents had finally been alleviated. The territory under her rule was developing in a direction of prosperity and entering a virtuous cycle. The territory under Jiang Pingji's rule had been recuperating for 2 years. The granary was plentiful, the army was strong, and the horses were healthy. On the other hand, most of the other feudal vassals had just settled the war and had yet to recover. For example, Huang Song. Huang Song had conquered the entire territory of Haozhou. Now he was facing the same predicament as Jiang Pingji, a lack of middle-level talents. For this reason he personally went to Langjie County and Ningning County. There was an ancient saying, Hejian County attracts all the beauties in the world, and Longhuan County gathers the literary songs of the human world. Langjie County and Ningning County had been cradles for the export of talents since ancient times. They were the places with the strongest literary atmosphere. Huang Song had many talents under his command. Almost everyone had friends in these two places. With this layer of connection, even if the celebrities didn't think highly of Huang Song, they could still meet him for the sake of his friend. As for whether or not Huang Song could move them, it would depend on his personal performance. After one round, Huang Song managed to get close to many good seedlings. Because Master Yuanjing had gone to Wanzhou, Langjie Academy seemed a little quiet. As Master Yuanjing's first disciple, Qing Jing finally returned to Langjie County. Naturally, he had to visit his mistress. Master Yuanjing's mistress shook her head at Qing Jing. Your master is the same. He said he would be back in 3 to 5 months, but now he refuses to come back. If he wasn't old, I would suspect that he has been seduced by some stunning beauty. Recently, he hasn't even written home letters. Qing Jing was secretly amused as he listened quietly. If it weren't for Wunyang and Qingyun's filial piety, I would have brought people to Wanzhou to see who has seduced your master and refuses to leave. When Qing Jing heard the word Qingyun, he remembered that he was his junior sister's husband. Nie Sun's courtesy name was Qingyun. Qing Jing knew very well what his master's taste was like. A son-in-law who could satisfy him must be a dragon among men. Qing Jing pondered for a while and prepared to write a visiting card to meet this brother-in-law. In terms of appearance, Nie Sun was one of the few handsome men in the world. Especially the cinnabar dot between his eyebrows. It was bright red and dazzling, making his skin whiter than snow. He was even more beautiful than a married woman. He felt that Wunyang would be under great pressure facing such a husband. It was fine that he was beautiful, but he was also talented and had a firm character. He could be considered a gentleman. Huang Song glanced at him and whispered to Qing Jing in private. Yumo, do you think it's possible that this Nye Qingyun? Qing Jing said, we can try. Chapter 925. When Master Yuanjing received his wife's letter and learned that his son-in-law had been abducted by Huang Song, his heart skipped a beat. Tang Yao saw his teacher's expression and thought that something had happened in Langjie. He asked with concern, but Master Yuanjing waved his hand. Although he said that he was fine, he could not hide his worried expression. After another month, Wei Ci, who was far away in Shangjing, received the news that Nie Sun had returned to Huang Song's camp. At the same time, he received a private letter from his teacher, Master Yuanjing. Wei Ci read the letter quickly and flipped it over. A person's birth date was written on the back. The birth date was Nie Sun's. He used the person's birth date to make a divination. Wei Ci made a copy of the divinatory signs and the contents of his divination and sent someone to deliver it to Yuanjing. Master Yuanjing received the secret letter and quickly opened it. After a while he could only sigh. What a sin. Everyone knew that Nie Sun left Zhongzhao's Nie family to study in Langjie to find his roots. Nie Sun had been abducted and sold when he was a baby. After passing through the hands of several human traffickers, he ended up in Zhongzhao. He did not know where he came from or who his birth parents were. He also did not know if he was abandoned or if he was forced to separate from his birth parents. Nie Sun followed the clues of the human traffickers who had abducted him and traveled all the way, but the clues ended at the border of Dongqing. He heard that Master Yuanjing's divination was very accurate, so he went to Langjie County with the mentality of giving it a try. Master Yuanjing did a divination for him, and it showed that Nie Sun would meet his blood relatives in a few years. It seemed like a good divination, but it was actually a bad one. The divination showed that Nie Sun and his family would be killed. Either Nie Sun would die, or his family would die in Nie Sun's hands. Master Yuanjing asked Wei Ci to do a divination so that he could find out who Nie Sun's family member was. Wei Ci did the divination a few times and the conclusion was the same. The divination showed Qian, which meant that the person who killed or was killed by Nie Sun would be Nie Sun's biological father. If Nie Sun had been a famous scholar, the possibility of him going against his biological father would be very low. He could even avoid the bad reputation of killing his own father. But now he was instigated by Huang Song to become an official. He would inevitably follow Huang Song to war in the future. Who knew when he would kill his own father with his own hands? It was fine if this news was kept a secret for a lifetime, but if it was accidentally leaked, Nie Sun's reputation would be ruined. That was why Master Yuanjing said that it was an ill-fated relationship. Qingzong's second year June. Jiang Pingji was 19. Sister. Sis, wait for little brother. Lu Zhao rode on the maroon horse. He grabbed the reins in a panic and tried to catch up with Jiang Pingji. As it turned out, he really did not have the talent to ride a horse. Even after learning horsemanship for 2 years, he was still stuck at the level where he could only rely on the reins. Right at this moment, the maroon horse he was riding missed its footing and fell forward. Lu Zhao's heart was beating rapidly due to the sudden incident. He had no time to defend himself and could only close his eyes, hoping that he wouldn't fall and become a cripple. Yeah, the pain he expected didn't come. Instead, he felt his waist tighten, and his falling motion came to an abrupt halt. He was forcefully carried onto the horse. Sister. Lu Zhao opened his eyes and sat diagonally on the horse's back, looking like he was still in a state of shock. Jiang Pingji's expression turned solemn. She flipped over and got off the horse. Lu Zhao, who had just escaped, also climbed off the horse's back shakily. This horse, it's probably crippled. The horse's hoof is completely broken. Jiang Pingji squatted down. The maroon horse's large, moist eyes were wide open. Its body was twitching because of the severe pain. Lu Zhao went forward to take a closer look and found that the front hoof of the maroon horse was indeed bent at a twisted angle. It was quickly bleeding and swollen. Who on earth dug such a hole here? Lu Zhao's heart ached so much that he wanted to cry. He had pestered Jiang Pingji for a long time to get this maroon horse. For this, he had even agreed to many unfair terms. He had to practice hard for more than 2 months before he could barely reach the standard of the other party. He had put in so much effort to get such a good horse, but it was crippled by the hole in the ground after only a few days of riding. Jiang Pingji's expression turned solemn. She asked the guards to send the maroon horse back to the stable to see if it could be treated. This is not a hole dug by someone. Lu Zhao's expression became even more dejected. If it was not man-made, then it was naturally formed. Was his horse unlucky enough to step on it and break its hoof? Have you heard of the saying that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows? Jiang Pingji asked Lu Zhao. Sister, although I'm a little ignorant and incompetent, it's not to the extent that I don't even know that a cunning rabbit has 3 burrows. Lu Zhao swung the jade tassels hanging on his waist. Wait, sister, do you mean that this hole is not man-made? It was dug by a wild rabbit? It should be. Ask the people to stop racing horses nearby. Check how many rabbit burrows there are. Lu Zhao said, today I want to have an all-rabbit feast. I want to eat all these beasts that dig holes randomly. His heart bled at the thought of his beloved horse. Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a slight smile. She said, okay, I'll deduct Zixiao's salary and prepare an all-rabbit feast for you. Lu Zhao did not understand. What did wanting to have an all-rabbit feast have to do with deducting Wei Xi's salary? It was June now. The pasture was abundant. Wild rabbits were hopping around everywhere. After searching carefully, even Lu Zhao, who was a loser in archery, accidentally shot one. 200 guards went to catch them together. In less than an hour they caught more than 50 wild rabbits. Lu Zhao muttered. He said, even if I eat until my stomach explodes, I won't be able to finish so many. Jiang Pingji ordered the people to roast the wild rabbits. She and Lu Zhao kept 5 and distributed the rest. There are so many wild rabbits in the grasslands at the border of Chongzhou. There should be more in the northern borderline. Jiang Pingji chewed on a rabbit leg and looked in the direction of the northern borderline. She smiled and squinted her eyes. Of course. The rich pasture is all in the northern borderline. It's more attractive to these little brats. Lu Zhao was still dressed like a rich young master. Even when eating rabbit meat, he had to take out the exquisite silverware that he brought along with him. The plate he used was even made of transparent jade. Lu Shi had scolded him for being extravagant more than once. He was glad that he had a sister to protect him. His life was very comfortable. Is that so? Jiang Pingji smiled meaningfully. Lu Zhao shook his hands and used a knife to cut a few pieces of rabbit meat. He smeared seasoning on them evenly and skewered them to roast. The aroma filled the air. Sister, rabbit meat to show my respect to you. I didn't dote on you for nothing. After eating the roasted rabbit, Jiang Pingji and the others returned to the military camp. After 3 to 4 years of development, the northern borderline gradually recovered from the blow of the horse plague. The major horse farms also began to produce war horses. In less than 3 years, they would have the capital to command the Central Plains. Jiang Pingji wanted to take advantage of the golden opportunity before the northern borderline could catch its breath. She wanted to be the first to crush them on the grasslands. Dongqing was already divided. Each feudal lord had their own army. It was not that the northern borderline did not have the power to dominate the Central Plains. However, as long as Jiang Pingji was around, they could only dream. Chapter 926. Greetings, my lord. Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang arrived one after the other and took their seats. No need for formalities. I called you here for one thing, Jiang Pingji said. Previously, I suggested preparing for the northern borderline. Now that we've rested enough, I'm preparing to make a move next spring. But I still need to hear your opinions on this matter. Both of them were stunned. They were not mentally prepared at all. Following a lord who could do whatever she wanted, they could enjoy a different kind of stimulation every moment. Qiguan Rang asked, "What news did my lord receive?" If there was no external stimulation, his lord wouldn't go crazy with people at every turn. Jiang Pingji frowned as she recounted the day's experience. They stationed troops in Shangyu County. Although it was at the border of the grasslands, there were already many traces of wild rabbits. One could imagine what the situation would be like in the northern borderline, where the grass was more plentiful. Her intuition told her that next year was the best time to make a move. If they fought quickly, they could turn around and join the warlords in the Central Plains after a short rest. Then they could take advantage of the situation. If they missed this opportunity, it would be hard to say. However, fighting a war required accurate intelligence and credible plans. It could not rely on her intuition alone. Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen looked at each other. They also knew about the rabbit and sheep strategy that Wei Ci had implemented in the past. Now there were even traces of wild rabbits at the border. One could imagine that their strategy was effective. However, they still had to carefully consider whether it was suitable to start a war. Qiguan Rang stepped forward and bowed. He said, "My lord, in my opinion, it is better to be cautious. We can first send people to investigate the situation in the northern borderline. If the situation is suitable, then we can take stock of rations and troops. We can mobilize troops to guard the border of Chongzhou. We can strengthen the training of the troops and be ready for battle." There were many things to prepare for war. Not only did they have to understand the enemy's intelligence, but they also had to ensure their own supply lines. Fortunately, they had decided to station a large number of fields in Chongzhou and selected a few fields with strategic significance. When the autumn grain harvest came, it would be the third year of stationing fields in Chongzhou. The rations would be enough to support this large-scale war. The existence of the fields would not only reduce the loss of grain, but they could also provide support flexibly. They would not have to worry about the enemy interfering with the grain transportation route. Feng Zhen seconded the motion. Jiang Pingji said, "I know this too. I'm just informing you." Qiguan Rang and the other two secretly heaved a sigh of relief. As long as their lord did not go crazy and attack the north borderline tomorrow, everything would be fine. In the entire Chongzhou, no one was more familiar with the situation in the northern borderline than the Chui family. Jiang Pingji sent someone to invite Chui Yu, the head of the Chui family. She spent so much effort to rope in the Chui family, not only to use the Chui family to contend against the other aristocratic families of Chongzhou, but also because of their connections. Ever since Gu Xian followed Jiang Pingji's instructions and used a bunch of glass products to swindle a sum of money from the north borderline, he withdrew his business from the north borderline. This also meant that Jiang Pingji had lost an informer targeting the north borderline. Fortunately, the appearance of the Chui clan made up for this regret. Ever since Chui Yu boarded Jiang Pingji's boat, the Chui family's status in Chongzhou rose with the tide. In the past 2 years, the Chui family had not only made a lot of money by producing rice paper, but also won an unprecedented reputation and status. The whole clan wished they could worship Jiang Pingji as the god of wealth. In order to express his determination, Chui Yu even took the initiative to ask for a position that didn't involve any real power or suspicion. "Greetings, my lord." Chui Yu bowed, then nodded slightly to Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen. He was only willing to take a seat after the proper etiquette. Jiang Pingji asked, "Zhonghuan, I didn't summon you for anything else. I have something to ask you." Chui Yu said respectfully, "My lord, please ask. I will tell you everything I know." "Your Chui family has been managing the north borderline business. Have you noticed anything unusual in the past 6 months? If it were someone else, they would definitely not be able to stand the Chui family doing business in Chongzhou and earning money from the north borderline. They were like grass on the wall. Cui Yu initially wanted to give up the business in the north borderline. Compared to the rice paper business and the secret recipe for making rice paper that Jiang Pingji had given him, the profits from the north borderline business were more like chicken ribs. Rather than keep it and arouse Jiang Pingji's suspicions, it was better to give it up. Jiang Pingji stepped in to stop it and even secretly supported the Cui family to develop the business in the north borderline. Cui was a smart man. He immediately came to his senses and put more effort into managing the business in the north borderline in the past 2 years. Something unusual? Cui thought for a moment and said in shame, "What are you referring to?" The war horses produced by the Northern Kingdom's horse farm, the living conditions of ordinary herdsmen, the changes in the Northern Kingdom's court officials. That's about it. Jiang Pingji circled the area so it was much easier for Cui to answer. Because of the horse plague, there is not a single horse farm left in the north. However, production had been restored in the past 2 years. It was said that the largest farm had more than 700 new foals this year. The bloodline of the breed can't compare to those bred before, but it's still a rare breed. Cui continued, the ordinary herdsmen are still the same. Their previous losses were too heavy, and they haven't recovered yet. As for the changes in the northern borderline's court, perhaps because of his paranoia, the king of the northern borderline no longer trusts the wise Wu Liba. I heard that the king of the northern borderline's health is showing signs of decline. A few of the adult princes are already involved in political affairs, and there are faint signs of a fight for the throne. Many of the court officials have chosen to side with him, openly or secretly. Jiang Pingji knitted her brows tightly after she heard that. More than 700? So many? Jiang Pingji was shocked when she heard the number. It takes at least 3 years for a foal to reach adulthood. How long had it been since the horse plague in the northern borderline? The number of 700 was only the output of the largest farm. Including other farms of various sizes, the number of foals produced was at least 2,000. Where did they get so many maras that were of the right age to give birth? Cui Yu's expression was slightly solemn. He lowered his voice and said, "My lord, I'm afraid we have to ask the Mengs in Sangzhou about this." As soon as he finished speaking, Jiang Pingji raised her hand and smashed the table in front of her. "Meng Zhan, that old bastard. One day I'll dig up his ancestral grave. Isn't he afraid of going down in history?" Almost all the horse farms in Dongqing were in Sangzhou. In other words, the Mengs controlled the life and death of the horse farms in Dongqing. Without the Mengs' permission, how could so many pregnant maras be sent to the northern borderline? Cui Yu secretly wiped his sweat and continued, "The northern borderline paid 10 times the price to buy the horses from the Mengs. That's why, animals that have forgotten their ancestors." Jiang Pingji sneered. The Mengs were the descendants of the war god of the previous dynasty, Meng Jing. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline were the descendants of the Chengwu tribe. Meng Jing had contributed a lot to the massacre of the Chengwu tribe. She really didn't know how the 2 forces could be so thick-skinned as to cooperate. Jiang Pingji was angry. The audience in the streaming room was also shocked by her sudden outburst. After 2 to 3 years of practice, she gradually changed the inherent impression of the streaming room in the eyes of the audience in the blue bullet screen. Now the ratio of red to blue in the streaming room was no longer 19:1. It was infinitely close to 1:1. The audience from the 2 sides sometimes had friendly exchanges, and sometimes it was a tragic quarrel. The red side said that the blue side had despised the streaming room for many years. Why didn't they quit the streaming room completely? Why were they competing with them? Chapter 927. Banyuan, sigh, the streamer is going crazy. I haven't seen her swear before. Leisurely Xianshan, if it were me I'd be angry too. The Mengs of Zhangzhou must have a hole in their brain. For 10 times the profit, they actually sold such an important strategic resource, the maras of the right age, to a foreign tribe at the border. It was one thing to sell it, but this foreign race was going to attack the Central Plains. Kixingsu, I can understand why the host is so angry. A well-bred mare of suitable age is equivalent to a strategic resource like tank ammunition. No matter how short of money the motherland was, it would not sell it to a country that was hostile to it and constantly wanted to invade it. If the aristocrats of Chongzhou chose to collude with the nobles of the northern borderline to harm Jiang Pingji for the sake of their family's interests, then what about the Meng family of Zhangzhou? If the foreign tribes of the northern borderline were to quickly recover their strength with the help of the mare, they would mobilize their troops to the Central Plains and slaughter the Han people. The Meng family of Zhangzhou would be the greatest sinner of all time. The Meng family of Zhangzhou didn't help them, knowing that their streamer had been cultivating for several years and was pointing her sword at the northern borderline. Not only did the Ming family of Zhangzhou not help, but they also hit her when she was down. If the world was in danger, no matter how much money the Mings collected, it would only benefit others in the end. Women in disguise. Fortunately, we discovered it early. If we discovered it 2 years later, the cavalry of the northern borderline would have recovered at least 40% of their combat power. Meet you 21 years old, I suddenly thought of something. The 3 families of the northern borderline bought so many maras from the Meng family of Zhangzhou at 10 times the price. They must be very tight financially, right? The streamer plans to attack the northern borderline next spring. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline have no time to profit. In other words, the northern borderline is in a very awkward situation. If the host wins TSK, it will be a huge profit. Thorns bloom, haha, I was just about to say this. If the northern borderline is attacked, they will probably be stunned. Was it a pleasant surprise? Was it a surprise? Wasn't it exciting? The benefits brought by the maras would take time to show. Jiang Pingji did not intend to give them another 3 years to recuperate. Yiwu Yanling, we can't be too optimistic. The northern borderline is vast and powerful. Their strength lay not only in their cavalry, but also in their ability to fight on horseback. The host has more than 100,000 troops under her command, and they are elite soldiers who have been carefully trained for 2 to 3 years. It may seem like a lot, but it is impossible for all of them to be deployed on the battlefield. She also needed to leave some people behind to protect the territory under her rule, in case someone took advantage of the situation to invade. In other words, only 70 to 80,000 soldiers could be sent to the battlefield. Don't you think it's too strenuous for 70 to 80,000 people to fight against the northern borderline? The northern borderline could even beat up the whole of Dongqing, let alone Jiang Pingji, who currently occupied less than 1/3 of Dongqing's territory. Zhaoran, our ancestor Sun Tzu's Art of War said it well. Victory is the most important thing in war, not the long duration. If the long duration lasts, the soldiers will be blunt. If the city is besieged, the soldiers will lose their strength. If they lose their strength, the goods will be exhausted. If the host is dragged into the mire of a tug-of-war by the northern borderline, her chances of further development will be very slim. Will the feudal vassals around her turn a blind eye? At that time, not only would she have to face the suppression of the northern borderline's heavy troops, but she would also have to worry about the stirring feudal vassal forces behind her. The larger the war, the more important it was to end it as quickly as possible. With every day that passed, the risks they faced would increase. Even a big country could not withstand a prolonged tug-of-war, let alone a small vassal like Jiang Pingji. Fortunately, the northern borderline thought they were smart and made a stupid move. They greatly underestimated Jiang Pingji's strength and ambition. If it had been other feudal vassals, they might not have dared to take the initiative to stroke the tiger's whiskers in the northern frontier, much less 3 years. The northern borderline could take advantage of the gap of a few years to recover its vitality as soon as possible and recover the investment it had invested. After taking a breather, they could regain their arrogance. However, this was Jiang Pingji. She started plotting against the people of the northern borderline at the age of 12. Would she watch such a good opportunity slip away from her eyes? Now it was time to consider pulling in the net. Jiang Pingji said with a serious expression, "This matter is very important. The secret must not be leaked and the northern borderline will find out in advance." It was not that she did not trust the people present, but the ancient people's awareness of military secrets was too poor. In the history of the previous dynasty, how many coups had failed because of the leak of secrets? Returning to her own tent, Jiang Pingji wrote a secret letter and sent it to Shangjing at an urgent speed. While waiting for Wei Xi's news, she began to make preparations. Cui Yu followed Jiang Pingji's orders and increased the number of merchants heading to the northern borderline. In order to gain the trust of the northern borderline, Cui Yu smuggled rice paper at a high price with Jiang Pingji's tacit approval. Using this method, the Cui family's business reached out to the political class of the northern borderline. Although they did not obtain a huge secret, they gathered a lot of useful information. Wei Xi received the secret letter and packed his luggage overnight, preparing to rush to Chongzhou. At the same time, the news from the Cui family's caravan lifted the spirits of Jiang Pingji and the rest. Tsk. It seems that wild rabbits are quite powerful. Herdsmen reared rabbits privately. There would always be rabbits that escaped carelessly and turned from domestic rabbits to wild rabbits. They took root and bred. Many wild rabbits sneaked into the pasture of the horse farm and dug rabbit holes one after another. At first, it was nothing, but when there were more rabbit holes, it was inevitable that horses would step into them. The lucky ones were safe and sound, while the unlucky ones had their legs broken. If a good horse's leg was not carefully cared for, it would be difficult to recover to its pre-injury state. In other words, the horse would be crippled. Before that, there were rabbits on the grasslands, but due to the restrictions of natural enemies and human activities, their numbers were limited to a certain range. Now, herdsmen reared wild rabbits privately, causing the number of wild rabbits to increase dramatically. However, the natural food chain had a certain degree of self-regulation. The increase in the number of wild rabbits fed more wild wolves on the grasslands. The number of wild wolves on the grasslands increased, requiring more wild rabbits as food. For a time, both parties maintained a delicate balance. Wild wolves had always been a headache for the horse farms. They were fierce by nature and often moved in groups. Every time they appeared, they would cause many casualties and bring great damage to the horse farms. Not only the increase in the number of wild wolves, but from time to time, there would be news of the horse's legs being injured. Once or twice was not a big deal, but when the reports increased, it quickly attracted the attention of the upper management of the horse farms. They sent people to find the source of the horse's leg injury and soon found the answer: rabbit holes. Rabbit holes were not unfamiliar to the grassland herdsmen. These bastards. They gritted their teeth in anger and felt their hearts bleed. The horse farms organized people to catch rabbits, but they greatly underestimated the number of rabbits. They could not find a solution to the rabbit hole problem. These bastards must have taken the wrong medicine. Why are there so many of them? The owner of the horse farm was dumbfounded. He still did not realize the seriousness of the matter. It was not until a few horse farms faced the same problem that they came to their senses and hurriedly reported the problem to their superiors. The wise man of this generation in the northern borderline was Wu Liba. As a key figure, many matters had to go through his hands. After screening, the important reports would be sent to the king of the northern borderline. Why are there so many rabbit holes in the horse farms? Wu Liba keenly noticed the abnormality. He did not submit the reports to the king of the northern borderline. Instead, he personally went to each horse farm to carefully understand the situation. After asking, he only had one thought in his mind. Chapter 928. Wu Liba had a bad premonition. Were there so many rabbit holes in the pasture in previous years? Wu Liba summoned the owner of the stud farm and inquired about the situation. The horse farm owner shook his head. Although rabbit holes have appeared in the past, there weren't many of them, and they weren't as densely packed as they are now. The uneasiness in Wu Liba's heart intensified. Something was not right. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. Although he was a man born in the grasslands, he had lived a good life since he was a child. He rarely came into contact with the lower-class herdsmen and didn't even have a deep understanding of the situation in the grasslands. This was because he was a wise man of the northern borderline's foreign tribes. He had learned the Han culture of the Central Plains and used the essence of Han culture to help the northern borderline prosper. All these years, in order to help the northern borderline recover from the horse plague, Wu Liba did not have the heart to focus on anything else. Moreover, the king of the northern borderline was getting older, and the princes under him were getting more and more mature. The fight for the throne was about to surface. With two hidden dangers added together, how could Wu Liba have the energy to care about the lives of the lowly herdsmen? If it wasn't for the fact that the number of rabbit holes had increased greatly, causing the horses in the farm to be crippled, he wouldn't have investigated to the end. When his subordinates placed the information they had found in front of him, Wu Liba was so angry that he slammed his palm on the table, his expression ferocious. Who allowed these fools to act smart and raise wild rabbits? Wu Liba was exasperated. The guard was startled, and then he lowered his head to conceal the rage that surged in his eyes. If the imperial court had not made a mistake in its policy and bought the Fergana horses from Shalon, causing the entire northern borderline to be infected with the horse plague, would the low-level herdsmen be so poor that they had no money to buy rice? If they didn't rear these rabbits, who knew how many families would be forced to sell themselves as slaves? However, the guard did not dare to say this. He had been by Wu Liba's side for a few years and knew his temperament very well. Master, do you know how the herdsmen lived in the past few years? The guard reminded him carefully. Wu Liba's expression froze. Of course he knew. He was even indirectly related to the current situation. In order to cultivate more war horses, the royal court of the northern borderline promised the herdsman families benefits by selling them foals. Then the government would buy them back at a high price. Because of this policy, the northern borderline was able to develop in a short period of more than 10 years. It even threatened Dongqing so much that they dared not act presumptuously. This suggestion was made by Wu Liba. It was because of it that he managed to secure his position as the wise one and gain the king's trust. This was true for success and also true for failure. The herdsmen's families had invested all their resources in the war horses and had no other source of income. The northern border horse plague broke out, and the imperial dynasty wasn't willing to make up for their losses, causing many families to die. Even if Wu Liba did not care about the lives of the commoners at the bottom of society, he could predict the consequences. Wu Liba said angrily, "Even so, they shouldn't have done this." The guard had a strange expression. If the herdsmen did not rear rabbits in exchange for food, what else could they do? Could it be that he didn't want to eat food and instead lay on the ground to eat withered grass? Rabbits had a short birth cycle and were easy to raise. Ordinary herdsmen's families relied on them to survive the hungriest times. If the royal court of the northern borderline was willing to take pity on the herdsmen and compensate them for their losses, they would not have to rear rabbits. The herdsmen had lived on the grassland for generations, so they knew how annoying it was for rabbits to dig holes. However, for the sake of their family they had to do so. The guard wisely chose to remain silent. Wu Liba said, "Continue investigating. I don't believe that the Central Plains is so lacking in rabbit meat and rabbit fur. This is clearly a conspiracy against our Beijiang, and we must capture the culprit." The guard obeyed the order and went to investigate. He would not have known if he did not investigate, but after investigating a little, Wu Liba watched with trepidation. Almost every month, there would be caravans from different places purchasing smoked rabbit meat and tanned rabbit skin from the Beijiang herdsmen. The amount each time was not large, but when added up, it was an astronomical figure. Apart from that, they also purchased wool and mutton. Compared to selling mutton, the herdsmen preferred to increase the size of their flocks and sell their wool. The herdsmen did some calculations. As long as the sheep were alive, they could continue to sell their wool, and the profits would flow steadily. If they slaughtered the sheep, it would be a one-off transaction and it would not be worth it. Selling wool was more profitable than selling rabbits. Almost every family reared sheep of varying sizes, and the number of sheep increased exponentially. The Beijiang herdsmen also had the habit of rearing sheep, so Wu Liba was not sure if this was a conspiracy. After thinking about it, he brought a group of guards to visit the herdsmen's families in secret. "It seems, there's nothing wrong," Wu Liba rode on his horse and looked into the distance. The herdsmen herded their sheep, and the blue sky and green grass made everything seem so harmonious and serene. "Old man, it must be tiring to watch over so many sheep." Wu Liba was dressed like an ordinary herdsman, and he did not carry any valuable items. He looked no different from an ordinary person. The old herdsman who herded the sheep chuckled. "It is indeed tiring. This year the pasture is not lush and we always have to move places." The Beijiang people were nomadic people and they followed the pasture when herding. Wherever there was more pasture, they would herd the animals there to eat. Wu Liba felt that something was wrong with the old herdsman's words, so he probed. "With so many sheep, I wonder how much pasture they will eat. At this rate, they will soon reach another pasture." The old herdsman said, "That's right. They can eat too much. If we don't herd them, they will be so hungry that they will pull out the grass from the mud." After Wu Liba heard this, a thought flashed through his mind, and he seemed to have grasped the truth. He hurriedly asked, "Old man, where did you herd the sheep previously?" The old herdsman pointed casually. Wu Liba thanked him and hurriedly mounted his horse and galloped in that direction. This season was the time when the pasture was lush. From afar, the entire vast grassland looked like a piece of emerald jade that had fallen to the mortal world. It was lush green and it made one feel refreshed. However, when Wu Liba arrived at the destination pointed out by the old herdsman, he realized that the pasture there was sparse. To make an analogy, it was like mild hair loss. Although the scalp was not exposed, it was obvious that the hair was not as lush as before. Wu Liba rode on his horse and muttered to himself, "Sheep? Rabbit?" The breeze on the grassland caressed the pasture, making it sway beautifully. Could it be pasture? In an instant he understood all the details and his heart tightened. Pasture was the key to rearing war horses. The mastermind was obviously using such a roundabout method to indirectly squeeze the survival resources of war horses. What a sinister plan. Wu Liba clenched his teeth. Fortunately, he had discovered it early. Otherwise, if the enemy had continued secretly for another 7 to 8 years, the Beijiang would not be able to afford to rear war horses. Chapter 929. The northern borderline imitated the Central Plains in many ways. Not only did they copy the harem system, but they also copied the rules of the imperial court. Court meetings were divided into large and small ones. The small ones dealt with small matters, while the big ones discussed important matters. In the big court meeting, the minister once again proposed the appointment of a crown prince. The king's expression was very ugly. His sons were in their prime, but he was beginning to slip from his peak, like the sun setting in the west. This feeling of powerlessness was unbearable for the ambitious him. At this moment he finally understood the Dongqing emperor's state of mind. He was also beginning to worry about personal gains and losses. He was afraid that his sons would take away his power and life when he was unguarded. As usual, he rejected the appointment of a crown prince. The king even reprimanded the minister and his sons who supported him. After an hour he was starting to feel a little exhausted. Rubbing his forehead tiredly, the king said, "My dear ministers, do you have anything else to report? If there is nothing else, please leave." Before he could finish, Wu Liba interrupted the king. "Your Majesty, I have something to report." In recent years Wu Liba was less and less trusted by the king. Because of the horse plague he was almost convicted. After hiding his strength and biding his time for a few years, Wu Liba's presence in the imperial court gradually diminished. Thinking about it carefully, this was the first time he had made a report at the big court meeting this year. Seeing that the person who stepped out was Wu Liba, the king of the northern borderline had no choice but to endure his fatigue and continue listening. "What is it?" Wu Liba handed over the bamboo scroll that he had written. "Your Majesty, I have been visiting for a few days and found that the herdsmen are raising a large number of rabbits and sheep. If this goes on, these animals will definitely occupy the pasture, causing the war horses to have no grass to eat. Now, it is a critical time for us to recover our vitality. We must not let our guard down. The major horse farms have reported that more and more war horses have broken their legs because of the rabbit holes. This means..." The king of the northern borderline glanced at it and frowned. He suppressed the rising anger in his heart and interrupted Wu Liba. "Wu Liba, this is the court meeting, not your home. How dare you bring such a trivial matter to the court meeting?" Wu Liba was shocked. He hurriedly half-knelt on the ground and made a gesture of allegiance. He said, "Your Majesty, I'm definitely not trying to scare you. Now, all the signs show that the caravan's large-scale purchase of sheepskin rabbit meat is clearly a conspiracy against the pasture. I earnestly request your Majesty to give the order to immediately capture those traveling merchants and interrogate them to find out who the mastermind is." The king of the northern borderline was furious. Wu Liba rarely cared about the lives of the lowly herdsmen. As the ambitious king of the northern borderline, it was even more impossible for him to care about the ordinary herdsmen. In his opinion, it was very normal for herdsmen to raise rabbits and goats. If there was anything abnormal, it would at most be carelessly releasing the rabbits, allowing them to breed. However, was this a big deal? As for the herd of sheep, the ancestors of the northern borderline relied on herding for a living. What was so strange about herding horses and sheep? Could it be that the old ancestor herding horses and sheep was also a conspiracy of someone with ulterior motives? The older you get, the more muddled you become. The king of the northern borderline scolded and threw the bamboo scroll with great force, hitting Wu Liba's forehead. Wu Liba did not expect to face such humiliation. He did not even have time to dodge. He was hit squarely by the bamboo scroll, causing his vision to turn black. His body, which was kneeling on one knee, swayed. The courtiers in the court were silent. They looked at Wu Liba from the corner of their eyes, as if mocking him for making a mountain out of a molehill. So what if they reared many rabbits and goats? The grasslands of the northern borderline were so big, how could they be eaten up by these two kinds of beasts? Even if they really ate them up, the grasslands would still be covered with green grass the next spring. They really did not know what was wrong with Wu Liba. It was not easy for him to have a chance to speak in the court, but he actually talked about such a trivial matter. "Your Majesty." Wu Liba seemed to have aged a few years. His eyes were red as he called out loudly, "If we do not curb it now, there will be a great calamity." The king of the northern borderline laughed coldly. He asked, "Great calamity? What great calamity? The northern borderline is rich in pasture. How can mere beasts eat it up?" Another courtier chimed in, "Yes, grass is the most vigorous and unyielding existence in the grasslands. I really do not know what your excellency Wu Liba is worried about. I have not read the books of the Central Plains, but I do know that there is a saying, groundless fears. Isn't that saying referring to you? As the wise man of the northern borderline, When had Wu Liba ever been mocked like this? When the northern borderline was threatened by the Central Plains, these people had stuck close to him. Now that they had lived a comfortable life for more than 10 years, they had all forgotten their past disgraceful behavior and jumped out one by one to add insult to injury. Groundless fears? That's a clever use of the phrase. Wu Liba's political enemy stepped forward and asked sharply, "Your Excellency, Wu Liba does not know the sufferings of the human world. Do you really think that love is enough? You have captured the merchant caravan. Who are you going to sell the accumulated goods to? Sell them to you? The herdsmen rely on their meager income to feed their families. Your Excellency Wu Liba, on the other hand, wants to cut off their livelihood with just a few words." Wu Liba gritted his teeth and said, "The mutton and rabbit meat in the hands of the herdsmen can be bought at a low price as military rations." His political enemy snorted coldly and said, "Buy at a low price? What price is considered a low price? Go and ask the herdsmen if they are willing to sell? Even if they are willing to sell, do you know how much it will cost to buy them? Don't tell me you have your wife empty out her family to buy them for you." Everyone knew that Wu Liba's wife's family was the richest merchant in the northern borderline. In the past, when Wu Liba fought wars, many of the military supplies were added by this wife's family. Back then, Gu Xnxion's colored glass of the Heavenly Palace had cheated the noblewomen and merchants of the northern borderline, swindling over 20 million strings of coins from them. Wu Liba's wife's family was devastated by this setback. Now, not to mention funding Wu Liba, it would be good enough if they did not occasionally come to Wu Liba to ask for favors. This political enemy had purposely brought up this matter to humiliate Wu Liba. Wu Liba was choked by the other party's words and almost couldn't breathe. If this was any other time, of course he could think of a countermeasure. Now that he had suffered consecutive blows, he could not calm down at all. The political enemy sneered and bent down to whisper in Wu Liba's ear, "Even if the king does as you wish, I'm afraid he will not be able to." Wu Liba suddenly turned around and glared at him fiercely. The political enemy smiled brightly, but his words were filled with thorns. "Sir, have you forgotten that it was you who suggested that the king purchase Maras from the Tsangzhou horse farm at a high price to fill up the farm so that it can recover quickly? The imperial court's finances are already stretched thin, yet you still bring up such a suggestion to the king at this time. The northern borderline imperial court was already so poor that they did not even have much food reserves. If they captured the merchant caravans and cut off the livelihood of the citizens, then they would incur the wrath of the masses. Wu Liba was usually quite smart. Why was he so muddle-headed when faced with such a matter? Or could it be that this person was used to being arrogant and thought that the northern borderline's prosperity was due to him alone? There was a saying in the Central Plains that went, "Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." This was not only used in the countries of the Central Plains, but also in the northern borderline. If the king of the northern borderline no longer had the hearts of the people, the herdsmen would turn and support the leaders of other tribes. Chapter 930. Wu Liba was exasperated. He said angrily, "Are we just going to ignore this and allow the mastermind to succeed? If the king's hegemony stops here, you will be sinners for all eternity. Who can bear the responsibility? Since you are loyal to the king, shouldn't you think for him?" As he spoke, his heart trembled. He was so angry that his entire face was green. How can the king fulfill his grand ambition of ruling the Central Plains if we allow these treacherous officials to drag us down? The political enemy's expression turned serious. His eyes were cold. He laughed ferociously and said loudly, "Fine, fine, fine. In the entire court only you are loyal to the king. We are all treacherous officials. But, in my opinion, you are also a treacherous official with evil intentions. Wu Liba, you ignore the current situation and force the king to do as you wish. Do you have the final say in the northern borderline or the king? So what if you are a wise man? Does the king not have the ability to judge for himself?" If Wu Liba had not suggested working with the Tsangzhou Meng family to buy Maras at a high price, the imperial court's finances would not be so tight. But now, the northern borderline imperial court was already stretched thin and could not afford to do anything else. In other words, the northern borderline was already tied up by the high price of horses. It would take at least a year or two to see any profits. The older Wu Liba got, the less sensible he became. Could he not see the northern borderline imperial court's current predicament? Don't try to sow discord. I, Wu Liba, am loyal to the king. I have never been disloyal, Wu Liba said. But you, can't you see the danger of the herdsmen raising large numbers of rabbits and sheep? If you can see it and still remain silent, Then tell me, who is the disloyal one? The political enemy wanted to say something, but the northern borderline king roared and stopped the two from arguing. All of you shut up. Court dismissed. The northern borderline king glared at Wu Liba. He used to like this wise man as much as he hated him now. In order to stabilize his power, the northern borderline king suppressed his adult sons. He deliberately ignored Wu Liba and tried to marginalize him. What? Who asked the herdsman to deify the wise man and think that whoever Wu Liba stood on was the real king of the grasslands? If it had been his younger self, he would not have cared about these rumors because he had the confidence to make Wu Liba work for him. Now that he was getting older, his health was not as good as before, but his children were still in the prime of their lives. Hearing similar rumors again, the king of the northern borderline only felt that it was ear-piercing. Even though he was slowly weakening Wu Liba, his sons were still rushing to curry favor with him. Which leader could endure this? After the court was dismissed, the king of the northern borderline privately summoned his confidant, Wu Liba's political enemy, the person who had been at loggerheads with Wu Liba. Greetings, Your Majesty. Wu Liba's political enemy was also an important minister of the northern borderline. His name was Haruncha. Haruncha, what do you think of Wu Liba's words? Are they just exaggerations or are they true? The king of the northern borderline was still hesitant. He understood Wu Liba's character. If it was not truly important, Wu Liba would not be so insistent. Haruncha's eyes flashed with a cold light. He looked very confident. I'd rather believe it than not. Of course, 1 or 2 rabbits and goats cannot amount to much, but what about thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions? It's like the locusts in the Central Plains. 1 or 2 may not be able to move, but the locusts that cover the sky and cover the sun can instantly gnaw a man into a pile of bones and destroy thousands of miles of fertile land. Your Majesty's ambition is the Central Plains. Naturally, you know what the situation is like after the locust plague in the Central Plains? Haruncha had not studied much. He was a typical northern borderline man. He advocated martial arts and despised words, especially the Confucian culture of the Central Plains. In his view, the northern borderline was a lion, and those sour Confucian words were a poison that corroded the will of the lion. That was why he especially hated Wu Liba. After all, Wu Liba had learned the culture of the Central Plains since he was young. After entering the political center of the northern borderline, he had proposed to promote the culture of the Central Plains several times. And so Wu Liba was hated by Haruncha. However, the king of the northern borderline was an ambitious man. He knew very well who would be most beneficial to him. Every time Wu Liba and Haruncha were at odds, the king of the northern borderline would choose to side with the former. Haruncha had always been suppressed by Wu Liba and could not lift his head for decades. Now the tables had turned. Haruncha learned from his painful experience and recruited his advisors to help him strategize. He had a vague posture of replacing Wu Liba. What you say makes sense. The king of the northern borderline thought of the locust plague and could not help but shiver. He then smiled bitterly. But what? But they had no money now. If they drove away the merchants with ulterior motives, what would happen to the rabbits and sheep in the hands of the northern borderline herdsmen? Wouldn't the herdsmen explode on the spot? Haruncha sighed. If that's the case, why doesn't Your Majesty do the opposite? The king's eyes lit up. He asked, what do you mean by the opposite? Haruncha said, no matter who is controlling the caravans, Your Majesty pretends not to know. Pretend not to know? The king of the northern borderline was stunned. He could not understand. Haruncha was secretly pleased. It felt good to keep others in suspense. No wonder Wu Liba, that sour Confucian, liked to put on an act. Yes, pretend not to know. Haruncha continued to act under the king's urging gaze. He said, Your Majesty, how can you treat rabbits and wild rabbits the same? Rabbits are lazy and stupid. Their meat is too fat and their fur is not bright. Wild rabbits are alert and intelligent. They run on the grasslands all year round to avoid enemies. Their meat is tender and chewy. The price of the latter is naturally higher than the former. In the past, those merchants could get away with it, but not this year. Your Majesty will send someone to hint to the merchants to increase the price of wild rabbits. This way the herdsmen will spontaneously catch wild rabbits. The herdsmen will earn a lot, and Your Majesty will not have to waste extra manpower to get rid of the wild rabbits on the grasslands. The king's eyes lit up. He had not thought of this idea. Is this feasible? Haruncha said, of course it is feasible. Your Majesty will not have to pay to get rid of the extra wild rabbits, and the herdsmen will be grateful to you. The king was overjoyed. This is a wonderful plan. Harun Cha could not help but smile. He said a few humble words. "You don't have to be so humble." The king sighed. He raised his hand and patted the other's shoulder. He said, "Compared to Wu Liba, who always causes trouble for me, you are the one who is truly loyal. Not only did you offer elixirs but you also gave me advice." Harun Cha said, "This is what your subjects should do." The king of the northern borderline felt waves of fatigue. He asked the female slave to bring his medicine. After a while, the king of the northern borderline felt refreshed. His face was rosy and his eyes were bright. As expected of the secret recipe of the Xia imperial court. It is good stuff for the emperor to enjoy. It is indeed effective. He let out a long sigh. His expression was dreamy. Because of his old age, his body was not as good as before. He could not even satisfy the women in his backyard. To a proud man of the northern borderline, this was an unbearable humiliation. Fortunately, Harun Cha was loyal and gave him the elixir recipe that only the emperor had the right to use. Every time he took it, he felt refreshed and full of vitality. He was even more energetic when it came to sex. It was said that long-term use could also prolong one's life. Chapter 931. Herentia and Wu Liba had been at each other's throats for many years and had always been at a disadvantage. Now that he had the help of an advisor, he was like a tiger that had grown wings. There were signs that he would replace Wu Liba as the wise one. Speaking of advisors, Herentia's lips curled into a smug smile. He hated scholars, but he also knew that if the north borderline wanted to be strong and prosperous, the brains of those scholars were indispensable. Coincidentally, among the slaves he bought, there was a scholar who came from a poor family. Moreover, he was a talented person with the ability to rule the world. Not only did Herentia free him from his slave status, he even put him in an important position and provided him with a luxurious life. There was a saying in the Central Plains that went like this: a scholar would die for his bosom friend. Herentia felt that the fact that he had saved his advisor's life was enough for him to sacrifice his life for him. Sure enough, that advisor also had the temperament of a Confucian scholar. He wholeheartedly wanted to repay Herentia for saving his life. Ever since he received the guidance of his advisor, Herentia quickly recruited his own group of forces in the imperial court. In order to consolidate his power, the advisor also offered an elixir formula, Hanshi powder. Hanshi powder was a miraculous medicine that was highly recommended by the aristocratic families of the Central Plains. Quite a number of scholars liked to consume it during gatherings to stimulate their own inspiration. After consuming it, one's mind would be clear as if they were being assisted by God. Furthermore, it would have the miraculous effect of prolonging one's life and replenishing one's yang energy. Herentia had some doubts at first, but after careful investigation he confirmed that his advisor was not lying. Hanshi powder was indeed a good thing, only the rich and powerful aristocratic families had the right to consume it. Herentia ate the amway. However, good things could not be enjoyed by himself. He first thought of the king of the northern borderline. By offering the prescription of the Hanshi powder, Herentia gained even more trust from the king of the northern borderline. "Mister's foresight is truly divine. Your guess is indeed accurate." Herentia imitated the scholars of the Central Plains and bowed with cupped fists. Unfortunately, his movements were not standard and looked somewhat comical. The advisor said, "Congratulations, my lord. The bitterness has finally come to an end." Herentia laughed heartily, saying, "If not for Sir's help, how could Herentia be here today?" After bragging to each other, Herentia rubbed his hands and asked his advisor, "Sir, what should we do next? That old man Wu Liba is not easy to deal with. I'm afraid he will make a comeback. A centipede dies but does not fall down." No matter what, Wu Liba was a famous sage of the northern borderline. "My lord, don't panic." The advisor smiled coldly. "That Wu Liba won't be jumping around for long." Herentia felt more at ease. The two of them plotted for a while more before Herentia left the advisor's tent, satisfied. After Herentia left, the well-dressed advisor's face turned cold as he stood in the tent, deep in thought. The advisor snorted. "Wei Zixiao, what are you up to?" At the same time, Wei Xi rushed to Chongzhou. He changed horses a few times before he reached Chongzhou. Feng Zhen snorted coldly and said, "Wei Zixiao, what do you have up your sleeve?" Wei Xi said, "Panacea." Feng Zhen choked. Qiguan Rang frowned. "Does Zixiao have other plans?" They planned to evacuate the merchants from the northern borderline and stop buying wool and rabbits, allowing the northern borderline to descend into chaos. If the herdsmen could not sell their rabbits and goats, it would inevitably lead to civil unrest. Even if it couldn't shake the northern border imperial court, it could cause the tribes in the northern border to be at odds. Unexpectedly, Wuxia refused and wanted to continue buying. Of course. Wuxia suddenly said something shocking. He said, "The king of the northern borderline will not live for long." Everyone in the tent widened their eyes in shock and looked at Wuxia. "When did you get the information?" Wuxia said, "There is no information." Feng Zhen pressed his throbbing brows and said impatiently, "Say everything at once, don't say one sentence at a time." Wuxia gave Feng Zhen a meaningful look, which made the other party feel baffled. "The king of the northern borderline is addicted to hanshi powder. He takes it without restraint. His body is strong on the outside but weak on the inside. He won't live for long." Hanshi powder? Hearing these 3 words, Feng Zhen shuddered subconsciously. He had no choice. The experience of being forced to quit by Jiang Pingji was too deep. Occasionally he would dream about it in the middle of the night and be scared awake. "Are you sure?" Wuxia said, "Absolutely sure." Feng Zhen's heart skipped a beat. "Wait, could it be, you are plotting something again?" Wuxia said, "It's nothing." After saying that, he refused to continue, making Feng Zhen and Qiguan Rang so angry that they wanted to hit him. Jiang Pingji, who was sitting at the head of the table, laughed and said, "Zixiao, don't tease him in case he quits." Wuxia nodded slightly and did not answer directly. Instead he mentioned another matter. "I am supervising the construction of the provincial government in Shangjing. Someone came to visit me at night. This person is a slave, an old escaped slave. He said to Ci that he wants to enter the Lord's tent and serve her." Feng Zhen said in surprise, "An old escaped slave? And he wants to recommend himself? Could it be that this person has some background?" "This person does indeed have a background. He is Sun Wen of Zhongzhou. His name is Zidao." "Sun Zidao? I have never heard of him." Wuxia said, "Of course you have not heard of him because this person is in his 40s and is not famous yet." Although he was not famous, Wuxia was very clear that Sun Zidao was a tough character to deal with. A great talent matured slowly, entering the Nie family of Zhongzhou at the age of 48, suppressing countless geniuses and securing the position of the chief military advisor. If the Nie family was able to expand rapidly in the early stages, it was all because of that genius who died young. In the later stages, it was because of Sun Wen that they were able to dominate a region. When Feng Zhen heard that Sun Wen was still mediocre in his 40s, he was surprised, but he did not show it on his face. If this Sun Zidao was not capable, Zixiao would not have mentioned him on purpose, right? Wuxia nodded. "This person matured slowly. Although he is old, in terms of scheming ability I am inferior to him. He was better at internal affairs and was weaker at scheming. Sun Wen was the complete opposite. If that is the case, then how did he become an escaped slave? Or was he an escaped slave from Zhongzhou?" Wuxia said, "This is a long story. Sun Wen was a low-ranking official in Zhongzhou. Logically, he would not have offended any important people. However, he had a clever son who showed off his abilities but did not know how to restrain himself. During a gathering, Sun Wen's son accidentally offended the Nie family of Bianzhou and was convicted because of his words. Sun Wen's son was beaten and his leg was lame. He caught a cold on the way to his banishment and died. Sun Wen's wife died of illness out of grief, and his daughter-in-law. In order to survive, Sun Wen could only take his young grandson and escape. They begged everywhere and ended up in Dongqing. Wuxia could never have imagined that Sun Wen, who was known as the wise man of the Nie family, would end up in such a pitiful state. Even in his previous life, when Sun Wen was defeated, he carefully burned incense, bathed, wore new clothes and committed suicide with a smile. Wuxia had seen Sun Wen's body, but he could not connect the Sun Wen in his memory with the pitiful old man he saw. This is also a pitiful state. Feng Zhen sighed. But what does this Sun Wen have to do with you not agreeing to evacuate the merchants? Chapter 932. The 15th of August. The moonlight shone like water and a mirror. Bianzhou of the Jiang dynasty. Bianzhou was a picturesque place with small bridges, flowing water, and houses. Every scene seemed to exude a lingering poetic feeling. Thin smoke shrouded the sky above the small town. Figures swayed in the buildings with white walls and black tiles. The waterside pavilions were arranged in picturesque disorder. This was a small town frequented by literati. The people lived and worked in peace and contentment, and no one picked up anything they left behind on the road. Most of the town's residents had experienced tragic times. They cherished their current life and faced it with a smile at all times. One day a family of 3 came to the small town. The man, although old, could still vaguely see the elegance of his youth in his eyes. He was gentle, refined, and dignified. The woman was about the same age as the man. She stood there, emitting an aura of 8 meters. She looked heroic and elegant. As for the handsome young man who inherited his parents' good qualities, his facial features were exquisite, like a gift from the gods. The family's appearance was comparable to that of immortals. The town's residents were all ordinary people. Occasionally seeing someone with good facial features would shock them, not to mention a real immortal. This family settled down in the small town. The man opened a bookstore on the street, selling ink, paper, inkstone, zither, chess, calligraphy, and other trinkets. The woman had nothing to do. She would either ride her horse through the streets or stand in the bookstore, staring at the man until he turned away. Although the couple was a little strange, it did not stop the town's residents from eyeing their son. East of the city, Minister Lu only had one daughter. She was tall and sturdy with an ugly face and a fierce temperament. The strong men took a detour when they saw her. Minister Lu was so worried about his daughter's marriage that his hair was about to fall off. However, his daughter did not care and continued to do whatever she wanted. Seeing that his daughter was about to cross the age of 20, Minister Lu gritted his teeth and decided to take in a son-in-law. With a son-in-law in his hands, would he be afraid that he would give birth to trouble or dislike his daughter? However, Minister Lu had a bad reputation and his daughter was a ghost. Even a beggar would not be willing to be their son-in-law. Just as Minister Lu was about to shift his gaze to the nearby town, the family of 3 entered his sight. "Daddy, I won't marry anyone but him." Minister Lu's daughter had good taste. She immediately saw the handsome young man who was about 18 years old. "Deal. Father is here to propose a marriage for you today." Lu Yuanwei patted his chest and agreed. The 15th day of the 8th lunar month was the National Day of Reunion. Most of the people had already closed their shops, but the bookstore on the street was still open. Where did Fusho go today? When Officer Lu came to the door with Iceman to propose marriage, he heard the woman sitting on the counter from afar and turned his head to ask the man inside. The man replied with a smile, "Isn't it to avoid you?" This person was actually over 50 years old, but from his appearance he seemed to be less than 40 years old. "Why are you avoiding me?" The woman boldly propped up one leg and placed it on the counter, completely ignoring the gazes of the outside world. She said, "In the past I was too busy to look at him, so he felt sad in private. Now that I've been watching him every day, he's hiding faster than a rabbit. Distance makes the heart grow fonder." The man smiled. "He doesn't like to practice martial arts. You beat him all day, how could he not hide?" The woman raised her eyebrows. "Fusho is already 18 years old. His arms can't even pull a stone bow. How shameful it is. His sister can beat him 10 times with one finger. Do you believe it? He actually dares to hide from me. How dare he? I should really throw him to his sister's place to train." The man said, "What's the difference? He just escaped from the tiger's den into the wolf's den? You're too lenient with him. If he doesn't listen, just beat him up. If one doesn't work, then beat him up again. There's nothing that can't be solved with a fist." The man said faintly, "If you're willing to beat him up, why would you bother me here? Now you think I'm annoying?" The woman quickly changed the topic, perfectly demonstrating what it means to say wind is rain. Lanting, don't let people see you as a joke." "What did you call me?" "Well, Ping Ping, don't make trouble." "No, I want to make trouble." The man looked at Officer Lu as if he had seen his savior. Officer Lu straightened his chest and was about to walk into the bookstore when he saw the rude woman holding an abacus blocking his way. "Can't you see that I'm dealing with family matters?" The woman threw a look at him, her eyes brewing a frightening sharpness. Officer Lu was so scared that he took a step back. After a while, Officer Lu felt that something was wrong. He was here to propose marriage. He motioned for Iceman to come forward and state his purpose. In his opinion, this family of 3 was just an outsider with no local relatives. How could they fight against a local snake like him? Iceman chuckled and stated his purpose. The expressions of the old couple changed. The man looked up at them and asked with a smile, "Marry into our family?" The woman said, "Propose marriage? To whom?" Officer Lu said, "To your son, of course." The woman laughed and said, "Look at your face. Even if you marry a fairy-like wife, your daughter won't be any better, right? Who gave you the courage to come to my son's house and propose marriage?" "I've been avoiding arrogance and impatience recently. I don't want to get angry. If you know what's good for you, get lost. How could Officer Lu not hear that she was mocking him for being ugly? He was so angry that his whole face kept twitching. You two don't want to live here anymore, do you? Hey, you're threatening me, right? Hey, Asiai, how many years has it been since someone dared to talk to me like this? The man who was named said, It seems like a long time. Officer Lu said, Don't refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. Okay, I'd like to see how you're going to make me drink a forfeit. The woman smiled and jumped off the counter. She was about to roll up her sleeves and go forward, but the man hurriedly raised his hand to stop her and pushed her behind him. That's enough of you. Your body has just recovered a little and you want to mess around again. You're 51 years old, not 15, the woman said. It's not that I want to criticize you, Wei Zixiao, but you're still so cocky after leaving the capital. How dare you control me? The man said, Who was the one who made the rules with me before? The woman was speechless. She muttered to herself with a look of resentment in her eyes. Zixiao, you've changed. The man said, If I didn't change, wouldn't you fly into the sky after leaving the capital? It wasn't easy to save his life from the hands of the King of Hell. Would he die if he didn't act rashly? Officer Lu, who was completely ignored by the couple, looked like a palette of colors. Before he left, he said angrily, The county magistrate and I are brothers-in-law. Just you wait. The woman raised her eyebrows. If that's the case, then thank you. Officer Lu was dumbfounded. Why were they thanking him? A few days later, Officer Lu's brother-in-law, who had become a commoner, gave him a hard slap. You incompetent bastard. The bookstore on the street had a new owner. In the suburbs. The woman rode on the back of a donkey, the man sat in a carriage, and their child walked on 2 legs. Father, I want to ride in a carriage. It's no use even if you call me mother, the man said. Mother, I was wrong. It's no use even if you call me father, the woman said. The sun was setting and the bells were ringing softly. The family of 3 gradually drifted away. The scene was distorted and the figures were blurred in front of him. The distant voice seemed to come from the sky. Blood splattered all over the soft mattress, but none of the officials were able to stop him in time. He used up the last of his strength and turned his gaze to a certain place. His body became colder and heavier, and he gradually closed his eyes. Pum. Chapter 933. Jiang Pingji felt dizzy, like a rootless duckweed floating in the vast sea. Lu Shi's body was that of an ordinary person after all. He would become weak when he was old, which was something Jiang Pingji could not resist. He could almost hear Jiang Yan's cries as well as the shouts of the officials, whether sincere or not. Forget it, Jiang Pingji's consciousness was blurred. She felt endless regret and let the darkness engulf her consciousness. After some time she felt a sense of crisis. She subconsciously jumped away from the attack. Her agility surprised her. Jiang Xiaojiu, your skills have regressed by more than a little. Who was it? Jiang Pingji heard a strange woman's laughing voice. It took her some effort to stabilize her body. It was so dazzling, the light around her was unusually bright. Jiang Pingji, who was used to the dark, was particularly uncomfortable. She even shed physiological tears. Who are you? Jiang Pingji blurted out. She subconsciously used her interstellar mother tongue that she had not used for many years. The woman was surprised and said sarcastically, Tisk, you were only injured once. How could you forget your old boss? Old boss? Jiang Xiaojiu? The 2 unfamiliar yet familiar words were put together. It was like 2 pairs of hands combined into one, unlocking the dust-laden memories of many years. She took a long time to adapt to the surrounding light. She was shocked to find that she was in the medical center of the federal military. She looked at her arm. She was also wearing the blue and white hospital gown of the medical center. What happened? She blinked her eyes quickly. She could not react until a person appeared in front of her. When she saw the person's face, Jiang Pingji subconsciously straightened her back and gave a federal military salute. Greetings, Chief. The other party stood in front of her, squinting slightly as he looked at her face carefully with a scrutinizing gaze. There's no problem with your spiritual fluctuation, the person said slowly. Otherwise, based on your performance just now, I would have suspected that your body was maliciously taken over. You've been in a coma for 3 months but you're still alive. If you don't wake up soon, I'm afraid the 7th Corps will be sent in. The human alliance was not harmonious. There were political struggles between the various corps. Jiang Pingji was under her. If she did not wake up, who knew if an outsider would be sent to take over the 7th Corps? By then, even if Jiang Pingji had a chance to wake up, she might not. Because there were far more people who didn't want her to wake up than there were people who wanted her to wake up. Receiving the news that Jiang Pingji was seriously injured and in a coma, the woman had no choice but to interrupt her vacation and take over the 7th Corps. "Thank you for your hard work, old chief." Jiang Pingji pressed her aching forehead with one hand. The memories in her mind made her unable to distinguish reality from a dream. That life was 30 to 40 years long, and it was already comparable to the previous years. After so many years, Jiang Pingji could only dig out her shallow memories and recognize that the woman in front of her was her old boss. As for more, she still needed time to dig deeper into her memories. Not at all, not at all. Cancel your sick leave as soon as possible and come back to take charge. The woman crossed her arms and leaned against the bed. She narrowed her eyes and said, "You should be more careful these days. The federal marshal election is approaching, and there are many people looking for trouble with you." Marshal election? Jiang Pingji was stunned. Was there such a thing? Wait, there really was such a thing. The old general in front of him had retired from the 7th Division and was originally going to enter the parliament to find a job, but who knew that the old general had contracted a genetic disease and would not live for long. For the sake of the political stability of the human alliance, the marshal election had to be held at the last minute. The old general was also on the list. As her successor, Jiang Pingji naturally belonged to her faction. Because Jiang Pingji was still in her prime and held military power, she had a lot of weight in the marshal election for the woman in front of her. As long as the marshal election was not settled, the battle surging in the dark would not come to an end. After sorting out the relevant memories, Jiang Pingji said, "Don't worry, old chief. I will recover as soon as possible and take up my post again." Her attitude was too obedient, which made the woman suspicious. Jiang Pingji had always been a thorn in the side. Back then, the woman had to bear the pressure and strongly recommend Jiang Pingji to push her to the position of the 7th Division. Even so, Jiang Pingji did not restrain herself. She was also indifferent to the old chief. What was wrong with her today? "It's good that you know." The woman shook her head and her tone softened. "Since you are awake, the pressure we face is less. There's no rush to return to your post. First, train your skills so that you don't know how you die if you are assassinated." Jiang Pingji felt that her skills had improved, but in the eyes of others she had regressed by 70 to 80%. With such weak skills, it would not be surprising if she was assassinated on the street. The old chief helped Jiang Pingji stabilize the 7th Division and bought time for her to adapt to the changes. When Jiang Pingji completely recovered to her peak state, more than a month had passed. When she was discharged from the hospital and returned to the division, she had only been away for half a year. For interstellar humans with long lifespans, half a year was no different from more than 10 days. However, Jiang Pingji's change shocked all the officers of the 7th Division. Had they ever seen a chief who quietly checked documents? In the past, they could not find anyone to sign. It depended on their mood whether they signed or not. Had they ever seen a chief who spoke calmly and without sarcasm? In the past, her subordinates would avoid her when they saw her. They were afraid that their guilty deeds would be exposed by the other party and become a topic of conversation. Had they ever seen a chief who was gentle, tolerant, and dignified? In the past, when her subordinates saw her, it was like a mouse seeing a cat. What had happened to cause such a drastic change in their chief? Is it possible that he is in love? This speculation spread like wildfire and even reached Jiang Pingji's ears. Jiang Pingji smiled. Although the news is not true, it is not groundless. The selection for the marshal was in full swing. The situation within the Federation became more and more serious. Jiang Pingji was so busy that she did not have time to think. She was like a spinning top. When the curtains fell on the election, more than half a year had passed. The Federation's military forces were purged. Fortunately, his old boss had successfully passed through all the obstacles. Otherwise, based on the old chief's voice in the election, the new marshal would not spare the officers under the old chief's faction after taking office. These days it is like a dream. Jiang Pingji blinked and looked at the old chief in the marshal's uniform. She sighed tiredly. The old boss laughed and said, "Aren't you dreaming?" Jiang Pingji was stunned. The old chief said, "You know why your immediate superior handed the 7th Division to you. It was for retirement. How could she participate in the selection for the marshal? This dream is full of flaws. I did not expect you to be willing to stay for so long." Jiang Pingji looked into his eyes, and her lazy expression became dull and insipid. "Then what is this?" The old chief laughed. "This is probably your subconscious hope before you die. You hope that everything will be perfect." "What about me? I'm dead." But you still have a chance, but this is a gamble. If you win, you can be perfect. If you lose, you will have nothing. What gamble? A comeback is equivalent to giving you a chance to be resurrected. However, your memory will be sealed. Everything will return to the starting point. Chapter 934. At this point, Wuxia could not help but sigh. Apart from him, who else in this world knew that Sun Wen was supposed to be the backbone of the Nie family and had made great contributions to the Nie family's plans for the world? But before everything started, the Nie family destroyed Sun Wen's family. In his previous life, Sun Wen sacrificed his life for the Nie family. In this life, Sun Wen would probably fight to the death with the Nie family. His wife, who had been with him for a lifetime, died of illness due to a broken heart. His only son, who was smart and cute, died of illness. His filial daughter-in-law also died tragically. If it weren't for his young grandson's support, Sun Wen would have died of illness in a foreign land long ago. For the sake of his young grandson, Sun Wen, who had always been arrogant, gave up all his dignity and begged. The grandfather and grandson ended up in Dongqing. The situation in Dongqing was chaotic. There were battles everywhere. Even if Wuxia did not see it with his own eyes, he could imagine how much hardship the grandfather and grandson had suffered in order to survive. Before Sun Wen secretly found Wuxia, he had been working at the construction site as a refugee for more than half a year. His actual age was only in his 40s, but now he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. His black hair had mostly turned white. Wuxia supervised the Jianzhou government and used work as a form of relief. Everyone was given work points every day. No matter man or woman, old or young, they would receive the same amount of food and allowance as they worked. The less they did, the less they got, the more they got. Sun Wen's biggest activity in the first half of his life was learning to ride and shoot. When had he ever done hard work at the construction site? In the beginning, the food he got for a day's work was only enough to feed his grandson. He could only find some leaves and bark and mix it with river water to barely fill his stomach. Later on, they became familiar with each other. Kind workers would even give him food and let the older children in the family take care of Sun Wen's grandson so that Sun Wen could work in peace. After getting used to it, Sun Wen's daily earnings gradually increased and he even had a slight surplus. He took great pains to build connections, inquire about information and open up connections. Finally, he found the only way to get in touch with Wuxia. Wuxia said that Sun Wen would visit at night. It sounded very elegant, but in fact he was in a very sorry state. Wuxia paid attention to his health, so he had the habit of taking a walk at night after dinner. However, his walking route was always different and there was no pattern. Sun Wen could only wait bitterly. After waiting for a long time, they finally caught the fat rabbit, Wuxia. In order to amaze the world with a brilliant feat, Sun Wen even thought of many opening remarks to analyze Jiang Pingji's temper. He chose the most arrogant one. King Wen of Zhou met Lu Shang, and Lu Shang helped King Wu of Zhou to wage war against the Zhou dynasty. In my humble opinion, Lu Zhongqing lacks nothing but Sun Zidao. Who was Lu Zhongqing? Lu Shi. On the surface, it seemed that Lu Shi was only compared to King Wen of Zhou. If Lu Shi was King Wen of Zhou, then who was King Wu of Zhou and who was LV Shang? Wuxi's thoughts turned, and he turned his head to look at the person who came, only to see a gray-haired old man dressed in tattered linen walking out from the dark shadows. Then do you know where Sun Zidao is? Far away on the horizon, yet close at hand. I am Sun Zidao. Sun Wen wasn't someone who liked to be modest. Although he was at the bottom now, he believed that he would rise again one day. This was how Wuxia first met Sun Wen. Sun Wen had successfully attracted Wuxi's attention, but it wasn't enough. He needed more bargaining chips to gain Wuxi's favor. As long as Wuxia valued him and introduced him to Lu Shi, Sun Wen believed that he had the ability to gain Lu Shi's appreciation. Sun Wen felt that he didn't have much to live for in this life, but his grandson was still young. If he didn't secure a future for his grandson, how could he meet his wife, only son and daughter-in-law in the afterlife? Therefore he could only succeed this time. Failure was not allowed. He was very lucky to have met Wuxia. Even if Sun Wen didn't scheme, as long as Wuxia knew his name, he would still introduce him to Lu Shi. Sun Wen offered his loyalty and entered the northern borderline as a slave to help Jiang Pingji complete her great undertaking. As for Sun Wen's grandson, Wuxia sent him to Wanzhou to look after him and made him a transfer student to the Golden Scale Academy. Not only was he a hostage, but he also made a promise to Sun Wen. Wuxia also promised Sun Wen that if Sun Wen unfortunately died in the northern borderline, He would adopt Sun Wen's grandson and take care of him as his own son. Without any worries, Sun Wen entered the northern borderline as a slave. In a few short months, he became the trusted advisor of the northern borderline's important minister, Haruncha. Everyone in the tent listened to Wei Si's narration and sighed. They also admired Sun Wen a little more. He was indeed a talent. At the same time, they were even more afraid of Wei Si. He had quietly placed such a terrifying spy in the northern borderline. It wasn't that Haruncha was stupid. It was clearly that the level of the spy that Wei Si threw was too high. As for Hanshi powder, Feng Zhen glanced at Wei Si. What was Hanshi powder? He had a deep understanding of it. Killing someone was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Wei Si actually used Hanshi powder to trick people. It was really well done. Zixiao usually looks like a decent person, but I didn't expect him to be a passionate person. Feng Zhen raised the wine cup on the table. Let's drink a big white wine. Jiang Pingji exposed Feng Zhen without holding back. If you are greedy and want a drink, just say so. Why drag Zixiao down? Zixiao's body is weak and he shouldn't drink. Prepare goat's milk that has the smell removed. Remember to make it warm. Feng Zhen mocked, my lord is biased. Zixiao is weak too. How can you allow him to drink? After saying that, he threw a meaningful look at Wei Si. When he saw Wei Si's treasured painting scroll, Feng Zhen knew what this fellow was thinking. Now that the Lord was taking extra care of him, Wei Si should be overjoyed, right? Hypocrite. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pingji smiled guiltily and blamed herself. It was indeed my negligence. Someone change all the military advisor's wine into goat's milk. Feng Zhen was speechless. He wasn't a child who hadn't weaned off his mother's milk. Why would he drink goat's milk? Wei Si, who was sitting opposite, took a sip of the sweet goat's milk. He threw a mocking look at Feng Zhen, who had fallen into his own trap. Serves you right. Who asked you to cause trouble? Go and drink your goat's milk. Qiguan Rang was the only one who put on a posture of watching from the sidelines. His eyes were slightly closed as if he was taking a nap. Feng Zhen concluded that Wei Si was lusting after his lord. Qiguan Rang was the opposite. He felt that his lord was drooling over Wei Si's beauty. And it was the kind of drooling. After this little interlude, everyone turned their attention back to the main matter. Knowing that Sun Wen was a spy in the north borderline, and a very powerful one at that, they could change their plans. Qiguan Rang asked, what's Zixiao's plan? Even smart people had different ways of thinking. They needed to exchange information and unify their standpoint and opinions so that they wouldn't drag each other down at critical moments. Chapter 935. Cause the northern borderline to fall apart in the shortest time possible? That's a good idea. Qiguan Rang finished and glanced at Feng Zhen. However, Zixia used a lot of Hanshi powder in the past. It's obvious that this thing won't kill you instantly. As long as you have a strong will, you can quit. The king of the northern borderline is a rare wise ruler. His confidence is firm and he might not really fall because of Hanshi powder. Feng Zhen was once again brought up as a negative example. It made him very depressed. A single mistake can cause everlasting regret. Friends around you always use you as a negative example. My heart is tired and I won't love anymore. Wei Si said, it won't take that long. Zixier's situation is different from the king of the northern borderline. Although Zixier has been using Hanshi powder for a long time, he doesn't abuse it. But the king of the northern borderline treats it as medicine to regain his masculinity. He takes it almost every day. After taking Hanshi powder, he goes to the harem to have sex with the concubines. Even a body made of steel can't take it. As long as the king of the northern borderline's health deteriorates, there will be people to send him on his last journey. If the king of the northern borderline and the chief of Shanghai County Wuma Shang, can't they see that they have an older and unmarried lord? Feng Zhen coughed lightly, indicating for Wei Si to be more reserved. Can't he see that they have an older and unmarried lord here? Qiguan Rang glanced at Feng Zhen and asked, is your throat itchy? Don't think that he didn't know what Feng Zhen's cough meant. Remember to drink more goat's milk. It moisturizes your throat. Wei Si smiled. Feng Zhen, goat's milk can moisturize your throat. Are you bullying me for being uneducated? Wei Si, this fellow was very naughty. Knowing that his lord wants to attack the northern borderline, he hurriedly planted spies in the northern borderline. Planting spies is fine, but he wants to hang debuffs all over the northern borderline and hope that the lord can defeat the northern borderline with her eyes closed? Doesn't he know that his lord is already very cruel? Jiang Pingji, who was sitting at the head, didn't seem to notice the open and secret strife between the three strategists. She smiled and said to Wuxia, "If we can successfully split the northern borderline from within, our chances of recovering the northern borderline will increase by at least 30%. We will remember Sun Zidao's contribution." Wuxia stepped out and thanked Jiang Pingji on behalf of Sunwen. Qiguan Rang gently waved his fan, his beard and hair fluttering slightly. He said, "My lord, the most important thing now is to investigate the details of the various tribes in the north borderline. If it's feasible, we can secretly support the weakest prince of the northern borderline so that they can fight evenly. The more evenly matched they were, the longer the civil strife in the northern borderline would last, and the more benefits they would get. On the contrary, if a certain prince was too powerful and crushed the other princes, stabilizing the momentum of the northern borderline, then it would not be easy for them to take advantage of the chaos in the northern borderline. Therefore, Qiguan Rang had the evil intention of scheming against the north borderline again. Is this feasible?" Jiang Pingji frowned. Qiguan Rang said, "Whether it's feasible or not depends on whether Sun Zidao is as capable as Lu Shang." Jiang Pingji glanced at Qiguan Rang with a smile. He held the fan handle in his hand, the fan slightly pressed against his knees, and his eyes were downcast. "Lia's hoodie, guess the conversation between our streamer and little Rang Rang through their eyes?" "Fukadujuo," the host said, "I know you're jealous." "Ziwen Dai," little Rang Rang said, "Humph, I'm angry, I'm going to ignore you." "Yongye Tianxin," Simiai said, "Didn't we agree to cook this little frog? Why has the Lord fallen in love with someone else?" "Bo Xiaoyin," Fengtian Tian said, "It's supposed to be a two-person show, but I've become the fourth person." The audience in the streaming room expressed that the drama queen's performance was more exciting than the streamers. Of course, it was fortunate that there were many people in the streaming room. Apart from the drama queen, there were also big shots from different industries. Jun Shuang, "I feel sorry for the northern borderline for a second. According to the streamer's rhythm, it's only a matter of time before the northern borderline is conquered." "Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, isn't that so?" "Sunwen sounds pretty awesome. Have you guys realized that anyone who has been stamped by Simiai is not simple? If Sunwen really has Lu Shang's ability, the northern borderline is destined to be torn apart. Moreover, the northern borderline is still a tribal nation. There is no concept of a big family among them. They are used to fighting for themselves. If even the northern borderline's royal court, which connects the forces, is destroyed, wouldn't they be scattered like sand?" Qiguan Rang is even more ruthless. He wants the northern borderline to die of internal strife. Baihe Dewang, if I say that this situation reminds me of the 8 Princes Rebellion and the 5 Barbarians Luanhua, will you guys scold me? Lao Siji Lianming, in addition to these schemes, the streamer is also ruthless in farming and training her troops. She is completely aiming at the northern borderline. In ancient times, 3 months of training was already considered elite. How long did the streamer's troops train for? 3 to 5 years, right? She still uses modern advanced training methods. Individual combat is not weak, but group combat is even more terrifying. This is the absolute confidence that they have in defeating the northern borderline. It is undeniable that sometimes conspiracies and overt schemes can indeed play a miraculous role, but the root of the war is the confrontation of the military strength of the two sides. Not to mention other things, the troops under Jiang Pingji are definitely considered the world's elite. If it was the northern borderline in its heyday, it would indeed be difficult for Jiang Pingji to fight. The current northern borderline is just a seriously ill tiger. Even though it is terrifying, it is not impossible to fight. The only problem is, how long will the fight last? The strategist's calculations are just to shorten the time of the direct battle and avoid entering the quagmire of long-term consumption. They discussed for more than 2 hours before the meeting finally ended. "Zixiao, stay. I have something to say to you." Wuxia was about to get up when Jiang Pingji stopped him. Feng Jin secretly winked at Wuxia. Qiguan Rang threw Jiang Pingji a look that said, "Take it easy, don't scare people." The two of them left. Jiang Pingji only said one sentence. "There is no need to adopt other people's children. It is closer to one's own children." Wuxia came out right after her. His steps were a little light. Because he had adjusted the details of the plan, Wuxia still had to secretly inform Sunwen to avoid accidentally hurting his own people. The most important reason he stopped the caravan from leaving the northern borderline was that the caravan was the communication channel between him and Sunwen. If the caravan stopped buying goods and left the northern borderline, Sunwen's intelligence would not be able to be transmitted, and his orders would not be able to be passed. As Haluncha's guest of honor, Sun Wen picked up the exquisite life he had in the past and lived a wonderful life. If only Wuxia did not like to cause trouble so much, driving a wedge between the princes of the northern borderline. As expected, the dagger is revealed. How did Lu Shi subdue so many demons? Wuxia had personally taught Sun Wen the secret code to communicate with the caravan. It was highly confidential. Ordinary people would only see a bunch of messy patterns in their hands. The style was similar to the ancient totems in the remote areas of the northern borderline. Even if it was seen by others, they would not be able to read it. Sun Wen spent a day memorizing all the notes. Only he could translate the real information. When he translated the real content, he secretly pitted the northern borderline for a second. Chapter 936. Now Sun Wen and Jiang Pingji were two grasshoppers on the same rope. He would only be happy if the other party was happy. Putting all this aside, the tribes of the north borderline were still tribes after all. If they were allowed to enter the Central Plains, the people would be plunged into misery and suffering, and the Han people would not be able to protect them. Although there were people like Wu Liba who advocated Han literature in the north borderline, he was a minority. Most tribes in the north borderline were aggressive and destructive. Their destruction of civilization was far greater than their protection and development. Even Wu Liba only learned Han culture to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the Central Plains. He tried to use Han culture to invade the Central Plains and occupy the fertile land. The history books had already given the answer to the consequences of letting the tribes of the north borderline invade the Central Plains. Let's not talk about the past, let's talk about the recent history. The four factions of Nanman and the three tribes of the north borderline were all different tribes. After the former conquered Nanxing, not even a blade of grass grew. They slaughtered savagely, looted unreasonably, killed, humiliated, and committed all sorts of crimes. The bloody invasion had already aroused resistance and disgust from the Han people of the Central Plains. The four factions of Nanman were a lesson that must not be repeated in Dongqing. Sun Wen lowered his eyelids, hiding the glint in his eyes and his deep thoughts. Wuxia told him what to do next but did not tell him the detailed steps. He still had to plan everything himself. The king of the north borderline has 9 sons. Which one should I choose? It was not difficult to choose. The difficult part was to make the 9 princes fight evenly and ensure that they split the north borderline into several pieces. The eldest prince lost his mother at a young age. Although he is the eldest son, he is violent and licentious. He even has the hobby of beating Han slaves to death for fun. Sun Wen wrote the word big on the expensive Shen paper and quickly drew a cross above the word big. If he encouraged Haruncha to assist the eldest prince, he would not do so even if he was a fool. After all, the eldest prince was a pile of mud that could not be helped. Although he was wise and far-sighted when he was young, he had been too stupid in recent years. The second prince is brave and good at fighting, but his mother's tribe is too powerful. If he assists him, I'm afraid it will backfire. It's not appropriate. Sun Wen wrote the word second again, roughly listing the second prince's strengths and weaknesses, then crossed it out without hesitation. The third prince is quite close to Wu Liba, even shamelessly acknowledging him as his teacher and learning Han culture from him. Sun Wen pondered for a while. He had seen the third prince from afar. He looked gentle, but there was no lack of ambition between his brows. If he assisted this fellow, wouldn't he create a second troublesome Wu Liba and make things more difficult for his lord? Therefore this fellow was also inappropriate. The fourth prince was born to a female slave. His status was low and his bloodline was inferior. However, he was adopted by the queen of the northern borderline who was unable to conceive him. His mother's family was powerful. However, the Empress's sister had given birth to the sixth prince, so the fourth prince would definitely be a stepping stone for the sixth prince. This could be considered. At the very least, he could instigate a fight between him and the sixth prince. We can think about it later. Sun Wen rejected 3 princes in a row, but he was barely interested in the fourth prince. He continued to count down. The fifth prince and the third prince were biological brothers, but the 2 brothers were obviously not of one mind and were hindering each other behind their backs. The sixth prince was the son of the current empress's younger sister, and his status was the most distinguished among the 9 princes. In other words, apart from the second prince who held the military power, the sixth prince was the most likely to compete for the king of the northern borderline. The seventh prince was very close to the northern borderline trading company. Because of his mother's tribe, he had a lot of dividends in the trading company and earned a lot of money. The 7th prince was not a concern, because this fellow was very close to the 8th prince and the 9th prince. Although they were not biological brothers, the 7th prince treated the 8th prince wholeheartedly. If he wanted money he would give money, and if he wanted people he would give them. At present, it seemed that these two princes could be divided into the same camp. As for the 9th prince, he and the 4th prince had the same mother, but he was not adopted by the Empress, so his status was very low. Sun Quan simply analyzed the situation of the 9 princes under the king of the northern borderline, and a general plan had already appeared in his mind. To be on the safe side, he planned to use a scheme within a scheme. On the surface he supported the 4th prince, but behind the 9th prince he would use the 4th prince to get rid of the other princes one by one, and then use the 9th prince to get rid of the 4th prince. As for how to get rid of the northern borderline princes, he needed to think carefully. It was best to kill several birds with one stone. He would not directly kill a few northern borderline princes, but he could further stimulate the conflict between them and the king of the northern borderline. At that time, then there will be a good show to watch. Sun Quan's face was expressionless. He placed the expensive but already ruined rice paper on the candle and burned it, erasing all traces. Wei Zixiao, oh Wei Zixiao. You must remember your promise. Only then can you live up to this old man's plan. Sun Quan's entry into the industry was a little awkward. If it had been earlier, he and his lord would have been able to nurture a friendship in times of adversity. If it was a little later, it would be the icing on the cake. Even if he couldn't make it to the top, Sun Quan didn't have much ambition. All he wanted was a place to stay. It just had to be at this time of year. The lord was preparing for battle in the north borderline. Although the chances of winning the former were quite high, it wasn't 100%. What if he lost? His grandson was still in Wanzhou. Sun Quan couldn't afford to gamble. Therefore he could only do his best and risk his life to help Jiang Pingji. The image of his grandson's young and adorable face appeared in Sun Quan's mind. His cold and hard heart softened a little, but it soon became even harder and colder. Beijiang must die. While Sun Quan was stirring up trouble in the north borderline, Jiang Pingji and the others were eating melons in the military tent. She was not eating watermelon. She was roasting sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. Where has Uncle Gu been doing business all these years? Jiang Pingji followed the instructions of the viewers in the streaming room and threw the sweet potatoes into the fire. At the same time she turned her head to ask Gu Xin, whose face was full of vicissitudes. Gu Xin traveled north and south to do business. He often only replied to a letter once every 6 months. Jiang Pingji had no idea where he had gone. Gu Xin smiled and said, he went to Beiyuan, Xichang and Shalan. The sweet potatoes were discovered at the border of Xichang, and the sweet potatoes were taken from Shalan. I asked the locals for advice and brought their seedlings all the way back with great difficulty. I just want you to have a taste. Wei Xi was silent and didn't speak. In his previous life, when the Jiang dynasty was established, the country was strong and prosperous. In order to please the emperor, the surrounding small countries always brought all kinds of things from their own countries. The officials of the Jiang dynasty didn't want to be outdone. The sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes were presented at that time. However, these two small things almost caused a bloody massacre. Sweet potatoes were grown at the border of Xichang. The locals chopped them up and fed them to pigs. No one had personally tasted them. In the eyes of the locals, they were not food for humans at all. They were only fit to be fed to livestock. In Shalan, sweet potatoes were also eaten by the poor. They were lowly food in the wild. Yet these two lowly foods were served to the emperor's table as dishes for a state banquet. After she ate a few mouthfuls with relish, someone actually stood up and pointed out the truth. To this day, Wei Xi could still remember the silence in the hall. Everyone was sweating and trembling all over. Who served the emperor's table food that only domestic pigs and untouchables ate? Chapter 937. Aren't you going to eat? I think it's quite delicious and tastes good. For the people, food that can fill their stomachs is good food. The so-called lowly or elegant is something that only rich second generations who are born with wealth and do not know hunger or poverty pay attention to. Not only did Her Majesty's appetite increase, she ate 2 portions and asked the royal chef to prepare one for the crown princess, Jiang Yan. Wei Xi remembered clearly that Her Majesty's body was getting weaker as she grew older. It was rare for her to have such a good appetite. The world is peaceful now, but I, Yener, cannot forget the sufferings my ancestors suffered in this chaotic world. I must always be grateful and put the people's livelihood in the first place. Only then will I not let down the blood and sacrifice of my ancestors. There is no distinction between high and low food. Are you saying that if I throw all the delicacies at the state banquet to the pigs in the pigsty, they are lowly food and not worthy of being eaten by all of you here? With just a few words, she not only smoothed out the malicious humiliation, but also showed her love for the people. At the same time, she handled it gently and avoided a bloody massacre. If she didn't say that, anyone who handled sweet potatoes, regardless of whether they were foreign ministers, servants, royal chefs or officials of the dynasty, could easily be accused of a groundless crime and could not escape the death penalty. If the purge was carried out, at least 2,000 lives would be lost. The majesty of the emperor could not be challenged by anyone. Her Majesty chose to handle it gently and even generously accepted sweet potatoes and sweet potatoes. She ordered the royal chefs to use these two foods as ingredients to research various dishes. When they were accepted by the people, they were promoted to the whole country. Who could have imagined that these two things could be so prolific? Because of them, the Jiang dynasty did not have a large-scale food shortage. After being reborn and seeing these two little things again, Wei Xi's heart was filled with emotions. Before he could come back to his senses, he heard Gu Xian's words. However, they are not popular locally. People won't eat them unless they are extremely hungry. They are usually fed to domestic pigs. Jiang Pingji's expression did not change at all. She smiled and said, "They taste good. It's good that they are edible." Wei Xi's expression became gentler and the smile on his lips became wider. Her Majesty was indeed the emperor. No matter when she was, her pure and innocent nature had never changed. Gu Xian smiled bitterly. Little master is still so open-minded. This old servant hasn't finished speaking. Jiang Pingji was drooling over the taste of the roasted sweet potatoes that the audience was talking about. She asked, "Is there anything else you want to say?" This old servant naturally has a reason for bringing them back. If it wasn't for this old servant wouldn't have dared to send such unpresentable food to little master. Gu Xian's way of thinking was still very conservative. Humans shouldn't fight over food with animals, it would be shameful to say it out loud. "Uncle Gu, I'm listening." Gu Xian said carefully, "They have a high yield and are easy to grow. They are not afraid of drought and people can eat them to fill their stomachs. They are suitable for farmers." However, this old servant carefully inquired about it. According to the old farmer, eating them together with a few kinds of food will counteract each other. In serious cases it can even cause death, so it's better to be cautious. For example, persimmons, eggs, river crabs, and so on. If it's light, it can cause unbearable abdominal pain. If it's serious, it can cause the intestines to rot. Jiang Pingji said, "Uncle Gu is really meticulous. If it were me, I'm afraid I wouldn't have noticed it." Gu Xian smiled, "Little boss is too humble." By the time they finished talking, the sweet potatoes were almost cooked. Jiang Pingji found a stick and prodded them out of the fire. Hot, hot, hot. Her fingertips were scalded and she raised her hand to pinch her ear. Only then did she feel better. When she peeled off the scorched surface and revealed the golden and fragrant melon flesh, she salivated even faster. She divided the roasted sweet potatoes into several portions and sent someone to deliver them to Fengzhen and Qiguanrang. The remaining portion was divided among the three of them in the tent. "Uncle Gu, you're getting old. Why don't you settle down and stop personally running around for business?" Jiang Pingji sighed. Gu Xian traveled north and south for business. It wasn't that he hadn't encountered danger. There were a few times when he almost lost all his belongings. He thought about the current situation of the 5 countries in the Central Plains and had no choice but to nod in agreement. He was old and it was time for him to stop and retire. Jiang Pingji said, "I'll take care of you when you're old." This old servant also has filial sons and daughters. "Little boss, you can't deprive them of their desire to be filial to their father." Gu Xian laughed heartily, his eyes full of sincerity. "This old servant has no regrets in this life to be able to hear you say this. No, there is one thing. What is it? Little boss, you're already 19 years old. When spring comes you'll be 20. Forgive this old servant for overstepping his bounds, but you should also consider your own affairs." His little boss was definitely the best. No man in the world was worthy of her. However, if the little boss didn't get married, how would she have children? If she didn't have any descendants, Gu Xian wouldn't be able to rest in peace even if he closed his eyes. "This matter isn't urgent." Jiang Pingji smiled. "Didn't I previously stipulate that female soldiers in the female battalion can only be discharged and married at the age of 25? I'm their lord. Every word and action is their role model. As their lord, I can't take the lead in breaking the rules. It's still early. Jiang Pingji's tone left no room for doubt. Guoxian could only give up. The sky gradually darkened. Guoxian got up and bade farewell. Jiang Pingji sent Guoxian off and said to Wei Xiao, "Zixiao, did you hear what Uncle Gu said just now?" Wei Xiao pursed his lips and didn't say a word. "Sai, it's not that I don't want to. It's obvious that she's unwilling to agree. I can only delay it as long as I can." Lord. Wei Xiao couldn't help but speak. "If you don't want me to talk nonsense, why don't you quickly submit?" Wei Xiao took a deep breath and hurriedly bowed before retreating. He was traumatized by never submitting. He would be safe if he left early. Jiang Pingji stood on the spot and shrugged at the audience in the streaming room. "Streamer V, look, you scared people away by playing straight. It's better to cook slowly." The audience's greatest joy now was to watch Jiang Pingji conquer the world, chase after Wei Xiao and trick her subordinates. The progress of the former and the latter had been climbing forward. Only the middle one had a long way to go. "Isha Jixing, my heart aches for the streamer. What kind of strategy and difficulty are you facing? Hell mode is nothing more than this, right? Wither into dust, my heart aches too." To the streamer, the difficulty of conquering Beauty CI seems to be more difficult than conquering the world. "My heart hurts, buddy." Jiang Pingji stationed troops at the border of Chongzhou and trained them every day to intimidate the northern borderline. The atmosphere became more and more solemn. There was a feeling that a war was about to break out. Sun Wen lived up to his previous bragging. He played the political situation of the northern borderline in the palm of his hand. Following the incident of hunting deer and partridge dying of illness, the conflict between the 9 princes and the king of the northern borderline completely surfaced. The northern borderline had the habit of autumn hunting to maintain their bloodthirstiness. Deeply influenced by the Han family's pursuit of deer, the king of the northern borderline also advocated hunting deer to show his supreme status in the northern borderline. In this year's autumn hunt, the deer was killed by the eldest prince. However, the arrow that killed the deer belonged to the second prince. The king of the northern borderline was so angry that his beard was about to fly off. He investigated and scolded his 2 sons, but in the end, he found out that the third prince was the culprit. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. "You and Wu Liba learned the Han culture well, but you actually used it on your own brother." Beside him, the 4th prince's eyes flashed with a shrewd light. Chapter 938. This year's autumn hunt was destined to be an eventful one. First, hunting deer dragged the first prince, second prince and third prince into the water. Following that, Partridge died of illness dragged the rest of the princes into the water. Partridge was the most revered divine eagle by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, and was also the totem symbol of the northern borderline royal family. 7th prince obtained a very majestic partridge from the trading company. He liked it very much, but in the end he reluctantly gave it to his favorite 8th prince. 8th prince was naturally attracted by the partridge, but when he thought of the king of the northern borderline's violent and suspicious nature, how would he dare to keep such a good partridge in his hands? He and 7th prince discussed and prepared to present the partridge during the autumn hunt. If they could gain the approval of the king of the northern borderline during the autumn hunt, their status in the imperial court would rise. To maintain the partridge in its most perfect state they spent a lot of effort. The day before the offering, 7th prince and 8th prince even personally went to see the partridge, and its condition was very good. Unexpectedly, the partridge died of illness. 8th prince and 7th prince presented the partridge together, and when everyone carried it up, they found out that the partridge was already on its last breath and did not have long to live. The smile on the king of the northern borderline's face froze, and immediately turned into anger. He stood up and pulled out a knife from the rack, and acted like he was going to hack his 2 sons to death. The king of the northern borderline felt that his body was weak, and was unable to satisfy his harem. That's why he consumed Hanshi powder to regain his former glory. He also firmly believed that Hanshi powder could prolong his life, and preserve his glory forever. If it wasn't because he was old and weak, which man would like to consume tiger and wolf medicine? But now, his 2 good sons praised him as the king of partridge of the northern borderline, and then turned around to present him a partridge that was dying of illness. The king of the northern borderline was the overlord of the northern borderline, and a ruthless character. For power and status, he stepped on the corpses of his brothers and father, and led the northern borderline from a weak state to a strong state. To him, status and power were the most important. If his sons wanted to touch him, he would kill them. In such a short period of time, the king of the northern borderline was enraged, and the fingers on his right hand trembled uncontrollably. He thought that he would kill his 2 sons on the spot, but unexpectedly, his eyes rolled back and he fainted from anger. When the king of the northern borderline woke up, his anger was not as strong as before. Investigate. Investigate clearly for this solitude just who is playing tricks behind the scenes. No matter how stupid the 7th and 8th princes were, they wouldn't dare to give him a dying gonging and curse him in public. The only possibility was that the 2 of them had been schemed against. He wouldn't have known if he hadn't checked, but the moment he did, he was shocked. Many princes were involved in this, but the circumstances varied. Some were intentional while others were unintentional. Now, all 9 of his sons were reprimanded by the king of the northern borderline. The 4th prince knelt for 2 whole days before he was released. He went back to pack up, burned some incense and took a bath. Then he solemnly and secretly met with Sun Wen. "Mr. is an extraordinary talent, please accept this humble king's bow." The 4th prince did not like the Han culture, but he was good at pretending and observing people's expressions. He could often poke at the itch of others and win their favor. "4th prince, you don't have to do this. One is just acting on my master's orders." Sun Wen dodged and raised his hand to help the 4th prince, who was still bowing to the ground, up. After the 4th prince heard this, a fierce look flashed across his eyes. He admired Sun Wen because Sun Wen only had brains but no power and he could control him. However, the 4th prince hated Herentia very much and even wanted him to die. Because Herentia was an important minister of the northern borderline, but now he was toying with the prince of the northern borderline. When he inherited the throne of the northern borderline, the 4th prince would put him in an important position, but Sun Wen would not tolerate Herentia. This was also Sun Wen's goal. He wanted to use the 4th prince to eliminate the other princes, and then provoke the conflict between the 4th prince and Herentia. Before the 4th prince's power grew, he would first urge Herentia and the 9th prince to join forces and get rid of the 4th prince. In the end, only Herentia and the 9th prince were left. When the time came, Sun Wen had other arrangements. He would ensure that the northern borderline's royal family would be completely extinct. Thinking of this, Sun Wen's old face raised a somewhat detached smile, just in time to meet the situation. "This time, thank you for your guidance, mister, but this humble king does not understand one thing." The 4th prince secretly rubbed his knees. Bursts of pain spread throughout his body, making it impossible for him to kneel, so he could only sit on a small stool. Sun Wen asked, "4th prince, please speak." The 4th prince said, "Mister, you have the talent to rule the world. You can remove this humble king from this matter. Why make this humble king suffer like this?" After kneeling for 2 days and 2 nights, not to mention his knees, just holding in his urine for 2 days made him extremely uncomfortable. Self-degradation is also a form of self-protection. Sun Wen smiled. "You should learn this from your eldest brother. If everyone is involved and only you are aloof, won't the target be too obvious? At that time, you will become the target of public criticism. Therefore you can only suffer." The 4th prince sighed inwardly. It was not that he did not know this, but he could not blame Sun Wen for not doing a good job. "You mean, eldest brother used self-degradation to protect himself?" The 4th prince's eyes widened in surprise. The Han family pays particular attention to the eldest son. The 1st prince's biological mother is the first wife of the king. He is both the eldest son and the eldest son. Not only is he the oldest, but he has also been running his forces for the longest time. His mother's family is low-key and has not declined. Although the Han family's rules are not popular in the northern borderline, there are still important ministers in the court who like to follow this rule. At this time, the 1st prince is the target of public criticism. If he performs slightly better, not to mention the other princes, even the king will not tolerate him. In order to protect himself and plan for the future, he can only pollute himself and retreat in order to advance. The 4th prince did not agree, but Sun Wen's words were clear and logical, so he had to believe him. He remembered that the 1st prince was indeed outstanding when he was young. "Thank you for your guidance, sir." In this case he had to be wary of this eldest brother. The 4th prince consulted Sun Wen for an hour, as if he had obtained a treasure. Little did he know that Sun Wen, who was scheming for him, was a 4-way spy. He was truly loyal to Lu Shi. On the surface he submitted to Herentia, but he secretly hooked up with the 4th prince. Deeper down he was in cahoots with the 9th prince. How could he not be talented if he could have a foot in 4 boats with ease? When the atmosphere was almost ready, the 2 of them talked from the internal affairs of the northern borderline to the border. Speaking of the border, they had to mention the Lu family of Chongzhou, who was like a fishbone stuck in the throat of the northern borderline. After Lu Shi left, Lu Shi, who was even more difficult to deal with, came. The northern borderline must have offended the Tai Sui these few years. The fourth prince snorted and said contemptuously, "I wonder what color Lu Shi's woman is?" Sunwen said, "It doesn't matter whether she is good-looking or not. What matters is that she has troops and power in her hands." The fourth prince glanced at Sunwen and said, "Sir, you don't understand." "Don't understand what?" Sunwen asked, amused. The fourth prince confided in Sunwen and even joked from time to time. He said meaningfully, "For a man, there is nothing more interesting than conquering a woman who is difficult to conquer." The more difficult it was to conquer, the more enjoyable it was. Sunwen said calmly, "Oh." He understood what the fourth prince meant, but at the same time he felt a bit of disdain. Chapter 939. Sunwen despised the fourth prince in his heart, but his expression remained calm and composed. It was as if he would remain unfazed even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. The fourth prince seemed to have realized that he should not speak in front of Sunwen and leave a frivolous impression, so he quickly changed the topic. However, Sunwen controlled the tempo and successfully led the topic to the border. "Master Sun, in your opinion, how should we deal with the Lu family of Chongzhou?" The fourth prince coveted Jiang Pingji, but he wanted to use his male identity to gain a sense of superiority and boost his confidence. Returning to reality, he was only the son of a female slave. He had no right to speak to Jiang Pingji as an equal. Sunwen raised his eyelids and said calmly, "Does the fourth prince think that the most important thing now is to deal with the Lu family?" The fourth prince's expression froze and he looked puzzled. "The Lu family has stationed troops at the border and looks like they're going to attack. Isn't that enough? Or do you think that we should first deal with internal strife?" The fourth prince asked in a subtle manner. Was it more important to deal with Lu Shi or to get rid of his brother who was competing with him? Sunwen smiled and asked the fourth prince, "If the Lu family sends troops now, how will the northern borderline respond?" The fourth prince was speechless. "She won't do that. Even if the northern borderline was a starving camel, it was still much bigger than a horse like Lu Shi. She was just a small duke and she dared to attack the northern borderline? Who gave her the courage?" Sunwen asked again, "What if the Lu family does?" The fourth prince said proudly, "If she dares to come, we'll accept her." Sunwen smiled coldly, and the corner of his mouth curled into a mocking arc. "Wrong. If the Lu family arrives, the northern borderline will be the one retreating." The fourth prince flew into a rage when he heard this. He was about to lose his temper when Sunwen said calmly, "A horse plague destroyed most of the northern borderline's military strength. Wu Liba offered a plan to buy the maras from Changzhou at a high price, hoping that the northern borderline would recover quickly. It's a good idea, but he forgot that buying the maras at a high price gives the northern borderline a chance to be reborn, but it also puts them in an irrecoverable situation. As long as the feudal lords of the Central Plains realize that the northern borderline is strong on the outside but weak on the inside, they will gather their troops and have another Huangshui meeting. What will happen to the northern borderline then?" The fourth prince's face darkened instantly. Even though he was in the north borderline, he knew that the Huangshui meeting had gathered 23 feudal vassals of Dongqing, totaling more than 400,000 troops. Given the current situation in the north borderline, they really could not afford to offend them. As the prince of the northern borderline's royal family, the fourth prince knew the internal situation of the northern borderline best. Even though he kept telling himself that the cavalry of the northern borderline was invincible, after the horse plague, the cavalry had indeed been destroyed by 70 to 80%. Without their cavalry, the advantage that the northern borderline had over the Central Plains would be greatly reduced. In order to realize their ambition of conquering the Central Plains, the royal family of the northern borderline had put in a lot of effort for several years. Now that he was at a critical juncture of recovering his vitality, he could not afford to make any mistakes. If word gets out at this time? The fourth prince secretly clenched his fists. Lu Shi wouldn't dare to do that, and the other feudal vassals might not respond to her call. Sunwen poured a bucket of cold water on him. That's not necessarily true. There's an old saying in the Central Plains, those who are not of the same race are bound to have different intentions. The threat that the north borderline posed to Dongqing could be seen just by looking at the four factions of Nanman and Nanxing. In order not to follow in Nanxing's footsteps, there will definitely be feudal lords who will respond. The fourth prince's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. He followed Sun Wen's train of thought, and the more he thought about it, the more he broke out in a cold sweat. Lu Shi was not a feudal lord who acted according to common sense. A few years ago she had begun to station troops in Chongzhou, stocking up the fields and provisions, and was ready to fight. It was hard to say if this madwoman would risk her life to fight to the death with the northern borderline. Even though he was unwilling to admit it, the Han people did not lack madmen, nor did they lack the righteousness to sacrifice their lives for justice. With their pride and integrity, even if the northern borderline respected the Han culture, they still could not understand the foolish idea of sacrificing themselves for others. The fourth prince hurriedly asked, "Mr. Sun, you must teach me." Sun Wen smiled. Of course. He wore a smile on his face, but in his heart, he had cursed Wei Xi hundreds of times. Wei Xi was a lunatic who even exploited the labor of an old man to the limit. First, he had asked him to sow discord among the 9 princes of the northern borderline. He had worked hard and lost who knew how many brain cells, but he finally saw results. Before he had time to enjoy the fruits of victory, Wei Xi sent him another message. This time the content was even more outrageous. He was asked to help Lu Shi recapture more than half of Shangyu County, which had been occupied by the northern frontier for more than 20 years. When the northern frontier invaded, the entire Shangyu County fell, and all 6 cities were lost. Although Master Yuanjing went to the north borderline and took back 3 cities, there were still 3 cities in the north borderline's hands. If they couldn't even take back these 3 cities, how could they talk about reclaiming the northern border? When Jiang Pingji was worried, Wei Xi naturally tossed and turned restlessly in bed. As a result, this big hat was placed on Sun Wen's head. Go Sun Zidao. Asterisk asterisk, asterisk asterisk, one has a plan. We can sacrifice the rook to save the king, killing several birds with one stone. Sun Wen smiled meaningfully. Killing several birds with one stone? Fourth prince bowed deeply and said, "Please enlighten me, Mr. Sunday." After listening to Sun Wen's analysis, the fourth prince felt as if he had seen the sun. Chongzhou had many soldiers and generals, and every one of them was an elite. There was even a rumor that this batch of elite soldiers had been trained for more than 3 years. What did 3 years mean? Regardless of whether it was the Central Plains or the northern borderline, soldiers who had been carefully trained for 3 months could be considered elite soldiers. Soldiers who had been trained for more than 3 years, what should they be called? The Lu family of Chongzhou was indeed a troublesome enemy. If they were not eliminated, it would be difficult to rest easy. Fourth prince, you also know that it is not advisable to start a war in the northern borderline now, but we cannot let Chongzhou see any clues. Sun Wen's deep voice traveled into his ears, like a teacher of an academy teaching earnestly. The fourth prince subconsciously straightened his back and listened attentively. If that is the case, we might as well take another path and sacrifice the rook to save the king. Aren't the 3 cities of Chongzhou and Shangyu County the best candidates to be discarded? After hearing this, the fourth prince felt a wave of displeasure. He looked at Sun Wen with a suspicious gaze. This Sun Wen before him was also a citizen of the Han family. Are you saying that we should abandon the 3 cities? Sun Wen acted as if he did not see the fourth prince's suspicion and wariness. He smiled mysteriously and said, "No." The fourth prince's heart sank. He pestered him and said, "Please don't tease me. Just say what you have to say." To the northern borderline, the 3 cities are not even of any value. The fourth prince interrupted him. How dare you say that? A murderous intent emerged in his heart. Sun Wen said, "I'm afraid the fourth prince doesn't know the situation in the 3 cities. The Han people have either escaped or died. At the very least, they have been captured and sold as slaves. The fertile fields are idle and no one cultivates them. The houses leak and no one repairs them. The city walls are deserted and no one guards them. Among the people in the city, how many Han people are doing business properly? To the northern borderline, how is such a place different from the slums? The 3 cities were already deserted and had no value. Even their strategic value was greatly reduced. The once prosperous cities were now just places where the northern borderline's horse bandits or criminals hid. The northern borderline was the same as the southern barbarians. Their nature of destruction and plundering was far superior to governance. They would rob, kill, and plunder. The only thing they would not do was run properly. Chapter 940. Even so, the fourth prince still threatened him with a sentence. "Mr. Sun, aren't you afraid that I will punish you or even kill you for saying this in front of me?" As soon as he finished speaking, the fourth prince's eyes emitted a terrifying killing intent, and the scimitar at his waist was already unsheathed. Of course I'm afraid. Who wouldn't be afraid of death? Although this old man is 46 this year, I haven't lived long enough. Sun Quan was calm and composed. He looked at Prince Roland with a faint smile, his eyes shining with wisdom and confidence. His eyes clearly conveyed a message. He was not afraid. He was not afraid of the threat of death from Prince Roland. He did not even think that Prince Roland would really punish him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time. The fourth prince gasped for breath, with beads of sweat dripping from his forehead. He raised his hand and sheathed his scimitar. Forget it. If Mr. Sun has anything to say, just say it. I will listen. After saying that, he sat back down unwillingly. How could the fourth prince be a match for Sun Quan when it came to scheming? In terms of mental fortitude, Sun Quan had attained the transcendent realm of being able to remain unfazed even if Mount Tai were to collapse in front of him. In the end, Sun Quan won, completely dispelling the fourth prince's suspicions. Sun Quan said with a smile, "The 3 cities of Shangyu County are tasteless, but it's not a pity to abandon them. It's better to make good use of them. If we use it as bait, we can injure Lu Shi and prevent her from sending troops to threaten the northern borderline for a year or two. At the same time, we can also help His Highness get rid of his greatest threat." The fourth prince's eyes flashed fiercely as he said, "My mortal enemy?" Sun Quan said, "The northern borderline has always been particular about choosing talents and talents. Regardless of one's background, the fourth prince is naturally qualified to ascend to the throne. According to the inheritance system of the Han family, even if all his brothers died, the fourth prince would not have the right to inherit the throne. Who asked his mother to be a female slave for others to play with? However, the customs of Beijiang were different from those of the Central Plains. There were no rules in the northern borderline. Whichever child was stronger could inherit more property. Even if Prince Roland was just the son of a slave girl, he was still qualified to inherit the throne as long as he was strong enough. Sun Wan's short sentence quickly and accurately poked the fourth prince's weak spot. Prince Roland's hand that was holding the machete trembled, and even his breathing stopped suspiciously. Of course, he knew that he was qualified, but being qualified did not mean that he had hope. His mother's clan was too weak and barren. His starting point was the lowest among his brothers. If he wanted to overthrow the 8 brothers around him and ascend the throne, he would have to overcome 5 trials and kill 6 generals. You think I have hope? The fourth prince's breathing quickened. Sun Wenning had laid out such an inescapable trap. If Sun Wenning helped him with all his might, it might not be impossible for him to inherit the throne. Where there's a will, there's a way. How would you know if you don't try? Sun Wen's expression was indifferent. He didn't show any joy or sorrow, as if he was detached from the world. Among the 9 princes, the second prince has the strongest army. If the fourth prince wants to lay his hands on the throne, he will be the first person you have to get rid of. The first prince was using self-defiling methods to protect himself, but he was also secretly accumulating power, so he had to be on guard. One had a plan, killing several birds with one stone. Using the 3 cities of Shangyu County in exchange for Lu Shi being unable to mobilize his troops and for the first and second princes to be crippled. Do you think it's worth it? If he said that to Jiang Pingji, she would probably have twisted his head off long ago. Do you know what it means to not give an inch of land? Even if the land was left to grow weeds or turned into a cesspool, others could not even think about getting a piece of it. Jiang Pingji had once used the muzzle of a gun to poke the forehead of a neighbor from the Federation in order to negotiate with him. The 7th Army Corps was one of the 3 main battle armies. She directly spoke to the messenger. Either he retracted his leg or he started a war. Fortunately, the person Sun Quan was talking to was the 4th prince and not the cruel Jiang Pingji. The 4th prince's eyelids twitched violently, and his heart beat wildly. He was about the same age as the 1st and 2nd princes. When he was young, he was bullied, humiliated, and bullied by the 2. For the 4th prince, the 2 were like 2 mountains piled in front of him, so tall that it made him feel hopeless. At that moment, Sun Quan told him that he could get rid of the 2 of them and even prevent Lu Shi from mobilizing his troops. "Master, tell me quickly." The 4th prince clenched his fists nervously. Unknowingly, his emotions had been completely controlled by Sun Quan. "Your Highness, come closer." Sun Quan lowered his eyelids, and the 4th prince hurriedly leaned forward to listen. "Master Sun, please speak. Now is the end of the autumn grain harvest, and the grain is gradually being stored in the granary. The 2nd prince is impatient and eager for quick success, but he is not good at management. In recent years, the price of grain in the north borderline has increased greatly. He keeps so many private soldiers under him, and the grain has long been unable to make ends meet. The fourth prince, why don't you privately create a map of the granary in Chongzhou and reveal it to the second prince? With the second prince's temperament, he will definitely keep it a secret and take all the benefits for himself. What was harvesting? The troops and horses were not given rations, and there was no logistical support. They completely relied on the soldiers to raise their own rations, plunder from the people and be self-sufficient. The north borderline cavalry often harassed the people of Chongzhou, raided houses and plundered rations. At first, when they found out that Jiang Pingji was in Chongzhou, they wanted to repeat the same trick. However, Jiang Pingji was too cunning. Every year the location of the granary was different. The north borderline tried harvesting, but other than the first small victory, the troops who went to harvest almost starved to death in Chongzhou. After suffering a few losses, they knew that it was not easy to take advantage of Jiang Pingji. Harvesting was not very effective. Nowadays, the north borderline rarely organized large-scale cavalry to harvest. If the second prince wanted to take all the autumn grain for himself without anyone knowing, he definitely could not approach the border in the name of harvesting. Sun Wen continued, in this way, to prevent the outside world from knowing, the second prince will definitely take the initiative to ask for permission to guard the 3 cities of Shanyu. The fourth prince will then play a small trick and send people disguised as Lu Shi's troops to kill a few of his personal guards. The second prince will blame this on Lu Shi. However, you must remember, you must not let your own personal guards disguise themselves. It is best to let the first prince's people do it. Even if the deed is exposed, others will only find out that it was the first prince who did it, and deliberately incite the second prince and Lu Shi to fight. The fourth prince nodded as he listened. Sun Wen continued, Lu Shi has an explosive personality, and the second prince is obstinate and self-opinionated. If the two of them meet, it is impossible that they will not fight. However, no matter how many troops the second prince has, how long can he resist Lu Shi? The 3 cities of Shangyu County have not been repaired for many years. They will not be able to resist Lu Shi's powerful troops. If the second prince dies in battle, it will be fine, but if he doesn't, not only will he lose the private troops he has carefully raised, but he will also let the king see the number of troops he has and his ambition. As for the first prince, who deliberately provoked the war between the 2 sides, it will not be good either. As the fourth prince listened, he felt a chill in his heart, but at the same time he could not suppress his excitement. Very quickly he came back to his senses. What about Lu Shi? Sun Wen laughed. The 3 cities of Shangyu are already in ruins. Lu Shi has to deal with the aftermath after conquering them. Isn't this a good way to divert his energy? Chapter 941. Sun Wen was stirring up trouble in the northern borderline. He was full of conspiracies and tricks. Jiang Pingji was also ready for war. It was the autumn harvest. Everyone was so busy that their feet hardly touched the ground. When the autumn grain entered the warehouse, they felt more relaxed. This year's batch of autumn grain has entered the warehouse. Qiguan Rang presented a thick account book. Every grain collected was recorded in the book. Jiang Pingji flipped through it carefully. With this batch of grain we have the confidence to fight a war. Is there any news from Zixiao? Qiguan Rang held his hands by his sides and said expressionlessly, there's no news yet, but it should be soon. Jiang Pingji nodded and did not respond. Qiguan Rang endured for a while and had to take the initiative to speak. My lord has never seen Sun Wen. How do you know that he's as capable as Lu Shang? You trust him so easily. If he covets the power of the northern borderline. Qiguan Rang did not finish his sentence, but he believed that Jiang Pingji knew what he meant. We have to guard against him. Jiang Pingji said with a smile, I don't know if Sun Wen is as capable as Lu Shang, but it's enough for Zixiao to know. Qiguan Rang showed an expression that said, I knew it. He sighed and said, my lord has grown up. A cabbage had grown up and finally knew how to feed a pig. Look at what you're saying. It's as if the cabbage you painstakingly raised has been fed by a pig. Jiang Pingji teased, you're so jealous. Qiguan Rang secretly rolled his eyes and added in his heart, isn't it the other way around? He trusted Wei Xi's judgment because he trusted him. If not for some kind of honey filter, he believed that his lord would not be so rash. He frowned and said, my lord, when did you have such thoughts? After all, she was a female lord and was often criticized. If she could not maintain a clear relationship with her subordinates, her reputation might be tarnished. When did it happen? I can't remember. But Wenjing, you can rest assured that Zixiao will not affect my ambitions. Qiguanrang had been observing the surrounding situation as an outsider. He saw the situation more clearly than the people involved. I'm not worried about my lord but about Zixiao. Qiguanrang frowned. Wei Ci did not deliberately steal the limelight. He did not have a strong presence, but after thinking about what he had done, no one could say that he was not a pillar. Such a talent shouldn't be buried, nor should he be confined in a cage like a canary. If he didn't do that and allowed him to show off his talent, he would definitely die. Even if the Lord did not mind, would the other officials not have any thoughts about it? The most important thing for a faction was harmony and unity. Does it really have to be him? Asked Qiguanrang. It has to be him. The more I get to know him, the more I feel that he's the one I want, Jiang Pingji said with certainty. Ambitious men who wants to be a canary. If he doesn't want to live an ignoble life, I'm afraid my lord won't bear to let him suffer. If his identity was revealed, Wei Ci would have to stay away from the center of power. It wasn't that they didn't trust him, but it was for the sake of unity within the faction so that others wouldn't feel unbalanced or have negative emotions. If Jiang Pingji insisted on having her own way, she might harm her and Wei Ci. Then, what does Wenjing think? Qiguanrang said, it's better to keep it a secret. Rang can pretend that he doesn't know anything. Keep it a secret? Jiang Pingji murmured repeatedly. As long as it's the Lord's child, it will definitely be your blood. It doesn't matter who the father is. Qiguanrang said, you can say that you got pregnant because of feelings or that you got married and had a child in your dream. As long as you have a child, you can keep the father's identity a secret. As long as others don't know who the father is, Zixiao can also continue to realize his ambitions and aspirations. But in this way my lord and Zixiao will have to suffer. Jiang Pingji thought about it for a long time and laughed bitterly after a while. Wenjing, you're thinking too far ahead. We'll have to face it sooner or later. Qiguanrang took over the account book that Jiang Pingji had finished reviewing and said expressionlessly, you should also pay attention to your emotions. What happens in private is none of my business. In daily life, you should at least control your emotions. Just like the previous time, she looked at Wei Ci as if she wanted to skin him alive. It was always like that. Even the slow-witted generals could notice the clues. Qiguanrang also reminded her in private to prevent his lord from doing something that she would regret for the rest of her life in the heat of youth. Wenjing, I'll think about it. Although she didn't want to admit it, Qiguanrang's solution was considered the best of both worlds. It's still troubled times now. It's not suitable to think about these matters. We'd better get down to business. Jiang Pingji changed the topic stiffly. Qiguanrang could only roll his eyes helplessly. As they were talking, Wei Ci was summoned from outside the tent. Greetings, my lord. Wei Ci first bowed, then nodded to Qiguanrang, who was sitting next to Jiang Pingji. He took the initiative to sit on the other side. This is the tip-off I just received. The big fish has taken the bait. Wei Ci handed over the booklet with both hands. Jiang Pingji took it and glanced at it. This Sun Wen is truly capable. This trick within a trick is truly beautiful. The letter said that Sun Wen had secretly plotted and successfully made the second prince of the northern borderline volunteer to take the order to be stationed in the 3 cities of Shangyu. The 3 cities of Shangyu were not the same as before. There was no profit to be made. They were almost treated as a place of exile by the nobles of the northern borderline. The second prince wanted to gild himself. Why did he have to go to the 3 cities of Shangyu? Self-exile? When the other princes received the news, they all had the same thought. But when they thought of the second prince's usual arrogance, they felt that it was unlikely. But other than that, they could not think of a reason why the second prince would take the initiative to go to the 3 cities of Shangyu. The princes of the northern borderline discussed in private. Does the second prince think that the 3 cities of Shangyu can still recruit soldiers and buy horses? He might really think so. But there is no profit to be made in the 3 cities of Shangyu. He will only be disappointed if he goes. Maybe he's advancing by retreating? Using this to gain father's favor? If that's the case, this move is too lame. These people would not be able to figure it out even if they racked their brains. The second prince had a detailed distribution map of Chongzhou's granaries. According to reliable sources, the granaries stored Chongzhou's savings over the years. As long as the grain was taken away, Lu Shi would probably suffer a great loss. The second prince thought proudly. It was as if he could already see himself bringing back a huge amount of grain and being rewarded by the king. He had more soldiers in his hands than his other brothers. If he made a great contribution, he would not be far from the throne of the king of the northern borderline. Of course, the second prince was not stupid. He had already sent people to check the marked places in the granary beforehand. The news was true. Apart from that, this map was sent by his most trusted confidant, his mother's brother, his uncle. He trusted it so much because of all these reasons. Because of the huge amount of grain, the second prince made up his mind and pulled out all his private soldiers. Let's go. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.